Chapter 1. The Sample Tester. For 10 years, I made the perfumes that made another woman a legend. Nobody knew. That was the arrangement. A lab coat makes you invisible in a way a signature never does. The world lifts the crystal flacon and worships the name etched on the glass, never the hands that built what's inside it. They will say anything in front of the girl they call the sample tester, because a nose in a lab coat is a machine that happens to breathe. I learned more about who the Rêverie house really was at 4 in the morning, alone at the organ with 300 bottles and 1 blotter, than I learned in 12 years of every contract they slid across the bench and told me to sign quickly and never read twice. This morning in the lab, the heiress who will inherit a house she cannot smell looked straight through me and said, loud enough for the interns to hear, "Careful with those, you're here to test the samples, not to have opinions about them." I capped the vial, exactly level. Tonight they would give the industry's highest honor to an anonymous nose, the one whose formula their whole house signature was built on taking. And the name in the sealed envelope was mine. Let me tell you about 4 in the morning. The lab on the 9th floor of the House of Rêverie is the only room in the building nobody fights over. The offices upstairs are wars, corner windows, chair placements, whose name goes first on the press release. Nobody wars over the lab. They think of it the way you think of the room where the water heater lives. Necessary, loud in a bad month, not to be looked at. So it was mine at that hour. Just mine. I let myself in with the keys they had given me a decade ago and never once thought to change. And I stood for a moment in the dark with my hand flat on the light switch, not pressing it, letting the room announce itself the way it always did, by scent, before sight. Old cedar from the drawer runners, the mineral chill of the ventilation, a ghost of last night's work, a base of iris and something animal underneath, ambergris gone soft and salty like wet stone left out in weather. Then, when I finally pressed the switch, the lab came up in that particular chemical light, a white with no mercy in it, a light that shows you every flaw in the glass and every flaw in you and does not apologize for either. The organ waited where it always waited. That is what we call it, the perfumer's bench, the great tiered semicircle of shelves that curves around the working stool like the inside of a shell. 300 bottles more, rows climbing away from you, the top notes at the low front where the hand falls easily, the base notes racked high and to the back where they belong, the heavy things, the fixatives, the long shadows, absolutes in amber glass. Tinctures the color of tea and of blood and of nothing at all. Little numbered vials of the naturals Julian mills by hand, the real rose, the real jasmine that costs more per kilo than the car Clara parks across 2 spaces in the garage. And in front of the whole standing choir of it, a clean white blotter block, and a fan of paper strips, and my notebook, closed. I sat. I fanned 5 blotter strips between my fingers like a card sharp laying out a hand. And I did the thing I have done every working morning of my life. I found out what the house was really selling. Here is the truth they never taught the people upstairs, the truth I would put on my own headstone if I were the type. You find out what a perfume truly is at 4 in the morning, alone at the organ, when the label is off and only the accord is left. In daylight, with a name on the bottle and a price on the box, and a woman in silk telling a critic what he is supposed to be smelling, a perfume is a story. At 4 in the morning, it is only itself. It cannot lie to you. Strip the label off and dip the paper and wait, and the thing tells you exactly what it is made of, and exactly what it is worth, and exactly who made it, and whether they loved it or only needed it to sell. I dipped the first strip in the sample batch of our flagship, the one for tonight. Cold bergamot came up first, the way it always should, a green-cut citrus with the dawn still in it, bright and a little cruel. Then the heart unfolding, iris, powdery and grave, that gray-violet hush that smells the way an empty ballroom sounds. Then the long, slow descent into the base, the amber and the resins, and, under all of it, right at the floor of the thing where almost no one ever listens, the note I had built with my own hands and told no one about. My note, the 20th. A bass accord no other nose in the world could construct, or, I was fairly certain, even detect. A warm mineral thing, ambergris and wet stone and something like the inside of a struck match a full minute after the flame is gone. Ember, if you want its old name. My fingerprint, laid down in the dry down where no spotlight ever reaches. I brought the strip to my face, closed my eyes, and let it dry down all the way to the end. And there it was, faithful, mine, singing quietly under the story. There is a weight to a crystal flacon that people never think about. Empty, it is already heavy, deliberate. The house telling your hand you are holding something serious before a drop is inside it. The buyers upstairs believe that weight is the perfume. They lift the crystal, they worship the etched name. They think the value lives in the object. But the object is only a jar. What is worth anything is the invisible thing poured into it at 4 in the morning, and I was one of maybe 3 people on Earth who could have built it, sitting in a stained coat in a room they never looked at, grading it like a stranger's homework. Pass. That was the first grade of the morning. There would be others. I keep grades. Not on paper, I am not that foolish. In the ledger behind my sternum, the one that has been open for 12 years, and everyone in this building has an entry in it whether they know I exist or not. It is a very simple system. I do not grade people on their talent or their taste or their titles, of which this house has a great and glittering surplus. I grade them on one thing only, how they behave toward the people who can do nothing for them. Toward the intern carrying a tray, toward the picker in the distillation town whose name is on no bottle, toward the woman they think tests the samples. Pass, fail. 2 columns. It fills up faster than you would hope. By 4:30, the batch was cleared and logged, and I had moved on to the day's real work, which was the 20 little vials of trial reformulations someone in Arthur Sterling's office had sent down for evaluation 3 days ago, with a note that said only, in a font that cost money, "Cost analysis, please assess suitability." I assessed them. I had smelled enough of these in my life to know a euphemism by its heart notes. These were not reformulations. These were replacements. Someone had gone through our flagship, note by note, and asked a supplier, "What is the cheapest thing that smells roughly like this from 6 feet away?" The real Heiress Absolute, the one that takes a field and a season and Julian's cracked hands to make, had been swapped for a synthetic. Not a bad one, I will be fair, a clever one, but a flat one. A copy that had the shape of Iris and none of its grief. The natural oak moss, gone, replaced by something that would never trigger a regulator or a conscience. And down at the base, where my 20th note should have lived, there was nothing. A hole. A smooth commercial floor swept clean of any fingerprint at all. I dipped a strip. I let it dry down. It smelled like a photograph of a person you used to love. I want to be precise about what that hole was, because the people upstairs will never understand what they were signing away, and someone in this story should. The real Iris in our flagship does not come from a drum. It comes from a field in a distillation town 300 miles south, from rhizomes that are dug and dried and left to age for 3 years before anyone is permitted to touch them for oil. 3 years, longer than most marriages in this industry, and then milled, in small, stubborn batches, by an old man named Julian Croft, who has done it for 40 years and can tell you by nose alone which season a butter came from and whether it rained the week they lifted the roots. That is what the Iris carries when it opens in the heart of the perfume. Not a smell, a history, a field, a season, a pair of cracked hands, and behind those hands a line of pickers going back further than any label. Women who gathered the flowers at dawn while the oil was still climbing into the petal, and then watched the crate go north with someone else's name stamped on the side. My grandmother was one of those women. She taught me to name a field blind before she taught me to read. A scent remembers the hands that gathered it, she used to say, even when the label forgets. The synthetic in the vial remembered nothing. That was the whole point of it. It was cheaper precisely because it had no history to pay for, no field, no 3 years, no dawn, no hands. You could make an ocean of it in a windowless plant in an afternoon. From 6 feet away it would pass, it would sell by the pallet, and no one who bought it would ever know they had been handed a photograph of a thing instead of the thing, because the only people alive who could tell the difference were the ones this house was about to fire. I sat with that for a while. The ventilation hummed. Somewhere below me, the city was still deciding whether to be awake. And I understood, the way you understand a change in weather before the first drop, that the rumor was not a rumor anymore. I capped the vials. I lined them up. I wrote 3 words in my notebook, the private one, the notebook of accords nobody is allowed to open, and I closed it. and I waited for the building to fill up with people who would explain to me all day what I was, and never once come close. Elodie arrived at 10 to 6, as she always did, with 2 coffees and the particular expression of a woman who has already decided the day is going to be stupid. "You've been here since God was a boy," she said, setting a cup by my elbow without being asked, because Elodie Dubois has known me for 8 years and knows exactly one thing about me that is true and does not ask about the rest. "You look like a blotter someone forgot to throw out." "Good morning to you, too." "Is it?" She nodded at the row of little vials, the euphemism vials, and her whole clever face went still. She had smelled them too, then. Elodie can read an accord almost as fast as I can, which in this building makes her the second most dangerous person in the room, and neither of us has ever said so out loud. "They actually sent these down. To us. To evaluate." She laughed, one flat note. "That's like asking the horse to evaluate the glue." "Assess suitability," I said. "Suitable for what? A dollar store? Eliza!" She lowered her voice, though there was no one, though it was not yet 6. "This is the whole line. This isn't one product. Somebody's costing out the entire house on cheap synthetics." She looked at me. "You know what that means?" I knew what it meant. It meant the naturals contracts torn up. It meant the growers in the distillation towns, the people who gather the fields at dawn while the oil is still in the pedal, the ones whose hands the labels forget, cut loose in a season. It meant Julian Croft's 40 years of sourcing reduced to a purchase order. It meant that the soul of the thing, the actual living soul, the reason a Reverie bottle ever meant anything to anyone, was being quietly measured for a coffin, so that the name on the glass could be printed onto body spray and sold by the pallet in an airport. "It means," I said, "that we should test the samples." Elodie looked at me for a long moment. Then she almost smiled, the way she does when she suspects I am being enormous under a very small sentence, and she went to set up her bench, and she let it lie. Pass. Elodie has always been a pass. The rest came in with the hour. The junior perfumers, red-eyed, brilliant, paid in exposure. The 2 lab hands. And Sophia. Sophia Navarro came in last and quietest, the way the gifted often do when they have already learned that being noticed in this building is more dangerous than being useful. She is perhaps 23. She has the thing. You cannot teach the thing and you cannot buy it, and Arthur Sterling would not recognize it if it bit him. But I saw it the first week she came, the way she stopped in the doorway of the lab and tilted her head unconsciously toward the organ, the way a plant turns to a window. She reads a dry down with her whole spine. She stays late for no credit. That morning, she had a batch of trial macerations she had made on her own time, off the books, because she wanted to understand what the real oak moss did to the real iris over 48 hours. And she brought one shy strip of it to me, not to Giselle, not to the seniors, to me, the sample tester, because some animal part of her had already sorted out who in this room actually listens. I smelled it. It was young. It reached for something it could not quite hold yet. But it reached in the right direction, and there was a boldness in the heart of it that most people spend a whole career learning to fake and never learn to mean. "The oak moss is fighting the iris," I said. "You'll want to give the iris a day's head start. Macerate it alone first. Let it settle before you introduce anything it has to argue with." She wrote it down like scripture. "Thank you," she said, and then lower, because she is kind and because she had heard something in the hall, "Eliza, is it true? What they're saying about the house?" I did not lie to her. I have lied to a great many people in this building, cheerfully, for years, and I will lie to them again tonight. But I do not lie to the ones who reach in the right direction. "Test the samples," I told her. "Trust your nose. Whatever they decide upstairs, that part is still yours. Nobody can take the way you smell." That was not entirely true either. I, of all people, know it is not entirely true. But she needed it. And it was close enough to a thing I still believed, and she carried it back to her bench like something warm. Pass. Sophia Navarro, pass, in ink, in the ledger, underlined. Giselle arrived at 11, which for Giselle is dawn. She came through the lab the way weather comes through a valley. All forward motion and a scent trail 3 days deep. She over-applies, she always has, because she cannot smell how much she is wearing. A fact I have known for 12 years, and she has managed to hide from an entire industry with a genius for confidence that I would honestly admire if it had not been built out of my life. Clara Mendez came half a step behind her with a tablet and a headset and the face of a woman calculating angles. Arthur Sterling drifted in a moment later, on the phone, smiling at whoever was on the other end, the way he never once smiled at anyone in this room. Giselle stopped at my bench. She picked up one of the flagship blotters, mine, from 4 in the morning, the one that carried my 20th note like a heartbeat, and she waved it under her nose with a theatrical little inhale, eyes half closed, performing for the interns the family gift, the legendary Reverie nose. She said. Yes, this is the one. You can just tell, can't you? It's alive. She had it upside down. The saturated end was pointing away from her face. She was smelling dry paper and telling the room it was alive. I did not correct her. That is a thing that takes discipline, and I have a great deal of discipline. It is nearly all I have left of the girl I used to be. I stood there in my stained coat with my hands folded, and I let the future celebrated nose of the House of Rêverie inhale a blank strip of paper and pronounce my soul beautiful. Careful with those, she said then, noticing me the way you notice a coat rack you nearly walked into. You're here to test the samples, not to have opinions about them. A little laugh for the interns. God knows we pay enough people to have opinions. Clara, without looking up from her tablet, is the sample situation logged? We need the bench cleared before the photographers come up at 2. The sample situation. That is me. I have been the sample situation for some months now, ever since Clara decided that referring to lab staff by name gave them ideas. Logged, I said. Level. I capped the vial. Exactly level. It is a small thing, keeping your hands steady while someone tells the room you are furniture. It is the whole discipline, actually, condensed into one motion. You do not spill. You do not flinch. You let them believe the thing they need to believe about you, because a person who is certain you are no one will tell you absolutely everything. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. They drifted toward the glass-walled corner office to talk numbers, and I picked up the tray, and I followed at furniture distance to clear the far bench by the wall, and that is where I heard it. The thing I had felt coming all morning. The drop I had smelled in the weather. Arthur had the phone away from his mouth, but not far enough. He never thinks the furniture is listening. 36 hours, he was saying, low, pleased. The gala's the cover. Everyone's looking at the stage. We close the paper in the back. Giselle signs, the buyer signs, done before the champagne's flat. A pause. A laugh I have grated 1,000 times. No, restructuring language only. Streamlined production, expanded reach. We do not say the word lab, and we absolutely do not say the word synthetic in front of press. The naturals people can be told after. The crew finds out Monday. Another pause. Then, quieter, warmer, the voice he saves for the people who can do something for him. Relax, nobody down there has any idea. They test the samples. They don't read the room. I set the tray down on the far bench. I fanned 3 clean strips between my fingers out of habit, the way another woman might fold her hands to keep them still. So, there it was, out loud at last, in a font that cost money. They were selling the House of Rêverie, not reviving it, selling it, gutting it, licensing the name onto anything with a nozzle, and doing it tonight, behind a party thrown to honor a nose they thought they had erased 12 years ago. They would sign in the back while a critic on the stage called the genius of this house a mystery. They would tear up the naturals contracts and turn Julian's 40 years into a line item and make Sophia the next hidden girl in the next lab coat, if they kept a lab at all. And the sealed envelope for the golden flagon, the one nobody upstairs had been allowed to open, the one with the industry's highest honor and the name of the anonymous nose known only as North 6. That envelope would be opened on that same stage, tonight, 36 hours from the moment Arthur said 36 hours. I had spent 12 years being very, very quiet. I had made something true once, a long time ago, and it had cost me everything I had. My name, my formula, a person I loved, the whole life I had been building. And I had watched another woman lift it to a critic's nose upside down and call it a family gift. And I had said nothing. And I had gone underground and gone patient and gone cold. And I had waited at this bench for a reason I did not fully let myself name even at 4 in the morning. I was not going to have to name it much longer. I picked the tray back up. I cleared the bench for the photographers. I moved through the room at furniture distance while Giselle practiced her acceptance smile in the dark glass of the corner office, and Clara timed the champagne, and Arthur told the phone that nobody down here reads the room. Down here, we read nothing else. They had 36 hours to sell the only place that ever felt like home. I had 10 years of practice deciding things in the dark. Chapter 2. Pass/fail. The blotters came back to me at the end of every day like a confession. 100 paper strips fanned across the drying rack, each one still breathing whatever it had been dipped in 6 hours before. That was my last chore, the one nobody thought about because nobody thought about me. I cleaned the organ. I reset the fragrance library. I fanned the used blotters in the fume hood and read them the way a doctor reads a chart. And in that reading, I learned more about the House of Rêverie than every executive who had ever signed my time card. You can grade a whole company off a rack of dirty blotters if you know what you're looking for. I did. I had a private system, the kind you build when the world decides your opinions don't count. Pass. Fail. 2 words, no appeal, kept nowhere anyone could subpoena. I graded people the way I graded an accord, not on how they smelled in the spotlight, top note bright and charming for the length of a first impression, but on the dry down. On what was left of them after the pretty volatiles burned off and only the base remained. Anyone can smell good for 10 minutes. I wanted to know who they were at hour 6, when they thought no one important was in the room. I was the no one important. It made me an excellent judge. 4:52 in the afternoon, the light in the lab going amber and chemical. And I was at the rack when Sofia Navarro came in carrying a batch of heiress concrete like it was a sleeping child. She was 24, gifted in the way that frightens the people above her, and treated like something you buy in bulk and replace. The house had a talent for that. Find a nose, use the nose, make sure the nose never learns it is a nose. I had watched them do it to 3 apprentices before her. I had watched them, 12 years ago, do it to me. Sophia didn't know I was watching now. She set the concrete down, checked the dilution log, and found what I already knew was there. Arthur Sterling had ordered the heiress cut with a synthetic substitute to save on the naturals bill, and someone downstream had logged the substitution under the naturals batch number so the paperwork would still read Rêverie Heiress, sourced. A small lie, the kind that costs nothing today and hollows out a house over 10 years, one honest note at a time. I expected her to sign it and move on. Everyone signed it and moved on. Signing and moving on was the whole business model. Instead, she stood very still. Then she did something I have thought about every day since. She pulled the substitute batch, relabeled it honestly, synthetic, cost cut, not what the bottle would claim, and quietly remilled a half-liter of the real heiress concrete out of her own reserve, the good stuff she'd been hoarding to teach herself with on her own time. She logged the real material under the real name. She corrected the lie back into the truth, out of her own pocket, for a fragrance that would never carry her name, in a house that would never know she'd done it, for a customer who would never smell the difference between an honest heiress and a clever fake. Nobody saw. That was the point. Nobody was supposed to. I have spent a lot of my life alone at benches. I know the exact weight of a good deed done where no camera reaches and no boss can reward it. That is the only kind of good deed I trust. The rest is marketing. A person who is kind for an audience is only telling you what they want you to buy. A person who is kind to a lie in an empty room, at her own expense, for a stranger she'll never meet, that person is telling you what she's made of, all the way down to the base. She was made of the right thing. I had known it for weeks and told no one, because in this house being known was the fastest way to be erased. I had watched the good ones get found and used and hollowed and thrown out, and I had learned to protect the ones worth protecting by pretending not to see them at all. Invisibility, I had discovered, could be a gift you gave as well as a wound you carried. Pass, I thought. Sofia Navarro. Pass, and put her somewhere safe. She caught me looking, flushed, like I'd caught her stealing instead of the opposite. The dilution was off, she said. I fixed it. I didn't see anything, I told her, which was the truest and kindest thing I had said out loud all week. She almost smiled. Then Arthur Sterling's voice came down the corridor, and both of us went back to being furniture. Arthur Sterling was the house's business director, and he had two voices. The first one I heard now, aimed at someone on the phone who mattered, a buyer, by the oil in it. No, no, the lab's a jewel, Victor, an absolute jewel. Heritage, provenance. The natural story sells itself, the growers, the hand-milling, the whole artisanal romance. A laugh, warm as a fireplace in a photograph. Between us, we can keep the story and lose the overhead. You don't pay for the field. You pay for the word field on the box. The second voice arrived when he hung up and turned into the lab. Reyes, why is there real iris in the batch that's supposed to be the cheap version? He read the corrected log, and I watched him understand that someone had spent their own money to make his product honest, and I watched it enrage him. Do you know what these cost me? Do you have any idea what your little conscience costs per liter? The bottle claims natural iris, Sophia said. I made the bottle true. The bottle claims whatever brand tells it to claim. He capped it off with a smile that never reached anything. You test, you measure, you do not decide what this house tells its customers. That's above you. That's above everyone in this room. His eyes swept past me on the word everyone, the way a hand sweeps crumbs off a table. He did not see a person. He saw a stain that hadn't been wiped yet. I have met a lot of Arthur frames. They are charming to the money and vicious to the mop. The tell is always the same. Watch which voice they use when they think the powerless can't hurt them. That is the dry down. That is who they are. Fail, I thought. Arthur Sterling, fail, and underline it. He turned to go, then remembered me the way you remember you left a light on. You, sample tech. The Gala flacons need their final fill checked tonight. Don't touch the composition, just count the bottles. Even you can count. Yes, Mr. Frame. I could count. I had, in fact, been counting for 10 years. He had no idea how high the number had gotten. The sale pitch, I overheard the way I overheard everything, invisibly, hands busy, ears open. They held it in the glass conference room off the atrium, the one with the good light, where Clara Mendez staged the house for anyone worth impressing. I was outside it with my cart, cleaning the display blotters on the wall rack, close enough to be scenery, far enough to be forgotten. A woman in a lab coat wiping strips is invisible in a way I have never once resented. It is the finest listening post ever built. Inside, Arthur, Clara, a lawyer with an empty coffee cup, and a screen that said, Meridian Luxury Group, in letters clean as a scalpel. The valuation holds if the deal closes before the gala, Arthur was saying. The Perfume of the Year launch is the peak of the brand's public value. We sell on the crest, not after. Signatures the night of the launch. And the lab? The lawyer asked, meaning the people in it, though he'd never call them that. Restructured. Clara said the word like she'd practiced it in a mirror. We keep the archive, we keep the name, we keep the heritage story. The rest gets modernized. Synthetics scale. Growers don't. You can't put a hand-picked field on a shelf in 4,000 stores. The buyer wants the formulas clean and the makers gone, Arthur added. No sentimental attachments. No one who thinks they own a piece of what they measured. There's the elder, the lawyer said, tapping something on his tablet. Bell, 40 years, deep grower relationships. He'll be a problem. He'll be a package, Clara corrected. Early exit, generous number, non-disclosure. Everyone has a number. And the young one, Reyes. She talks to the crew. She'll try to organize them. Handle her before the gala, quietly. We don't want a scene about jobs when the cameras are here to photograph a legacy. I filed that under the day's most important intelligence and kept my face a countertop. They had just told me, without meaning to, who they were afraid of. Julian, because he knew where the real value lived. Sophia, because she still believed the people who made a thing had a claim to it. The two people I had already graded pass were the two the buyer wanted gone first. Villains and I agreed, at least, on who mattered. We only disagreed about what to do with them. I kept wiping. A blotter dipped in last week's rose came up under my cloth, and the smell of it went straight past my brain and into the older, wordless part of me, the part my grandmother built, hands stained with the same rose, in a distillation town where the fields remembered every woman who ever gathered them. A scent remembers the hands that gathered it, even when the label forgets. Elena Santos told me that when I was 6. It has never once been wrong. It is the reason I am dangerous. I am the one hand this house could never quite wipe off its scent. No one who thinks they own a piece of what they measured. I capped the ammonia bottle on my cart, exactly level, and pocketed every word of it. Restructured. Before the gala. Signatures the night of. Meridian Luxury Group. I did not react. Reacting is for people who intend to lose. I intended nothing of the kind. Then Giselle Beaumont arrived, and the temperature of the whole floor changed. The way a room changes when someone walks in believing they are the only real person in it. The heiress, the face on the campaign, the nose of the House of Rêverie, celebrated in 6 languages, whose family gift for scent was printed on every press release and had, as far as I could tell in 12 years of standing beside her, never once existed. She had a critic with her, Louis Moreau, a fragrance writer whose blessing could move a launch, the kind of man who believed his own palate was a wonder of the age. Giselle was giving him the tour, which meant she was giving him the myth. "This is where it happens," she said, gesturing at the organ, my organ, 300 bottles I had arranged by hand, an architecture only I could navigate in the dark. "The soul of the house. I do my best thinking here at night, alone, just me and the raw materials." She said it looking at the bottles the way a tourist looks at a language they can't read. She could not have found the bergamot from the vetiver with a map. I had watched her mix up the two for a decade. Moreau lifted a blotter of the gala flagship, the perfume of the year, the one they were about to hang the whole sale on. The one I composed at 4 a.m. over 11 months, alone, with the label off and only the accord left. "They're saying the creator is a mystery," he said, "that the house keeps its true nose sealed. Some anonymous genius." "People love a mystery," Giselle smiled. "The genius is the house. The genius is the name." She took the blotter from him and brought it to her face, and I stopped breathing, because I knew exactly what was coming. She performed a smelling. I want to be precise, because it was a performance and I was the only person in the world who could see it as one. She closed her eyes. She inhaled with theatrical slowness. She let a small, private, knowing smile arrive, as if the fragrance were whispering to her alone. She said. "You can feel the iris opening up over the amber. That warmth. That's the family signature. You either have the nose or you don't." There was no iris in the opening. The iris was in the heart, 20 minutes down, exactly where I had placed it. In the top, she was praising there was bergamot, a green cardamom, and a cold mineral note like wet stone that had taken me 9 tries to get right. She had named a material that hadn't arrived yet, and attributed it to a bloodline she performed the way an actor performs a limp. She could not smell it. She had never been able to smell it. Somewhere under the glamour was a woman near blind in the one sense her entire name was built on. Faking a smelling in front of a critic, and she did not even know that I knew. Did not know there was a note in that bottle she would never reach. A 20th note down in the dry down that no palate on earth could find but mine. My fingerprint sunk in the base where no spotlight goes. "A perfume is nothing," Giselle told Moreau, handing back the blotter of my life's work, "until it has the right name on the bottle." I have heard her say it 100 times. It is her one true belief. And the terrible thing, the thing I would spend the rest of the week deciding what to do about, is that she was almost right. She just had the name wrong. Fail, I thought. Giselle Beaumont. Fail, and not note by note. All at once, whole, the entire structure alive from the label down. Clara Mendez spotted me while Giselle was still glowing. Head of brand, status the way other people have a pulse. She called me the sample situation in emails I wasn't supposed to see, and the help in ones she thought were private. And she had a genius for humiliation that I had come over the years to almost admire, the way you admire any perfected craft. "What is she doing here?" Clara said. She, not who, the pronoun you use for a thing. "Teo, forgive the ambiance. We're mid-restructure. The lab keeps its own hours." Moreau, who did not care about me and never would, glanced over. And Giselle, flush with her own performance, wanting to close the little theater with a laugh, turned and saw my cart, my cloth, the blotters of her flagship in my bare hands where I'd been re-racking them. "Careful with those," she said, loud, pitched for the critic, pitched for the interns who drifted to the doorway. "You test the samples. You don't compose them." A ripple of the smile. God, imagine. The sample tester with opinions about the perfume. She said it to Moreau, sharing me like a small joke you tell about staff. You have to watch them. Give one of them a blotter and she'll think she made the thing. The interns laughed because you laugh when Giselle makes a joke. Clara laughed because it was her job. Moreau did the polite, absent half-laugh of a man already thinking about lunch. And I stood there holding 11 months of my own hands, being told by the woman who could not smell them that I was not to have opinions about them. I have been asked how you survive a moment like that. The honest answer is unglamorous. You don't fight it, because fighting it is what they're waiting for. The tech who overreached, the difficult one, the lucky nose who forgot her place. They had ended me once already with exactly that word, overreached, 12 years ago, and I had learned the lesson so thoroughly it had become a discipline. You don't spend the charge early, you absorb it. You let it sink down into the base of you and you let it cure, and you keep it, because a thing that costs you enough will detonate later with interest, at the time and place of your choosing, in front of the exact audience that mattered. So I capped the vial in my hand, exactly level. I set the blotters back on the rack in the precise order I'd built them, an order she would never notice and could never reproduce. Yes, Ms. Beaumont, I said, just counting the bottles. She had already turned away. That was the mercy of being no one. They never watch you leave. They never wonder what you took with you. And I had taken everything. The pitch, the timeline, the buyer's name, the near anosmic smile, the whole confession fanned out across the day like blotters on a rack. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. They had decided a long time ago. It was the single most expensive decision any of them would ever make. Julian Croft found me at the organ after they'd all gone, at the hour when the floor empties and the bottles come back into focus and the label finally, blessedly, comes off the world. He was the house's raw materials master, decades in the trade, a man who could tell you the harvest year of an oak moss by the weight of its shadow. The one senior figure in the whole building who had never once looked through me. He set a small vial of something on the bench beside my hand, a new sandalwood a grower had sent him, precious, hoarded. Tell me what you think, he said. You're the only nose in this building I trust. He said it low, the way you'd say a thing you weren't supposed to. The nose, not the sample tech, not the help. He'd been calling me that quietly for years, never loud, never where it could cost me, but he meant it. I could hear that he meant it, the way you can hear an honest note under a chorus of fakes. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know that 12 years ago he had milled the naturals for a young perfumer's accord that changed her life and then took it. Didn't know the weathered woman at his bench was her. He only knew what his hands knew, and his hands had never lied to him. I brought the sandalwood up. Creamy, a little milk and blonde wood, a green edge someone had bruised in transit. It's beautiful, I said, and it's tired. 2 weeks off the still, badly rested. Give it a month in the dark and it'll bloom. Tell the grower to keep it cooler. Julian looked at me for a long moment, and something passed over his face. Not recognition, not yet, but its distant relative. You read that off one pass, he said quietly. I've known men with 40 years who couldn't. He picked up his vial, careful as prayer. Whoever taught you, he said, taught you the truth. She did, I thought. She's on the wall of a house that forgot her, with the wrong word under her photo. Give me time and I'll fix the word. Pass, I thought. Julian Croft. Pass. And there aren't many on that side of the ledger. He left. I stayed. It was nearly 4 in the morning, the hour that belongs to me, and I stood at the organ with 300 bottles and 1 blotter and let the whole day rise off it. You find out what a perfume truly is at 4 in the morning, alone at the organ, when the label is off and only the accord is left. You find out what a house is the same way. I laid the day out like a formula. Sophia, correcting a lie out of her own pocket where no one could see, pass. Arthur, honeyed to the buyer, cruel to the maker, selling the field and keeping only the word, fail. Clara, restructured, said like a lipstick shade, fail. Giselle, performing a smelling she was blind to, praising an iris that hadn't arrived, naming a genius that was a mystery only because they'd sealed her in a lab coat, fail, whole, from the label down. And under all of it, the thing I had actually walked away with, the note I couldn't stop smelling. They weren't just closing a business. Somebody had come shopping for this house's soul, cheap, with the makers thrown out as a feature. The gala, the honor, the sealed genius, my 11 months in a bottle, all of it was bait on a hook, and the hook had a name I now knew: Meridian Luxury Group. A buyer. Not a market turning, not bad luck, not the slow, tired death of an old house. A buyer, deliberate, engineering the timing to the night of my flagship's launch. Someone wanted this house gutted badly enough to pay for it. After 10 years of silence, I decided to find out who. Chapter 3. The Ember Accord. Smoke has a memory. Not the acrid kind that hangs in a kitchen, but the low, resinous ghost that clings to a wool coat after a cold night by an open fire. Birch tar softened with something sweet and animal underneath, so it reads not as burning, but as warmth remembered. 12 years ago, I built that ghost by hand, note by note, and I called it Ember. I was 30 then, and I believed a thing I no longer believe: that if you made something true enough, the world would come looking for the hands that made it. The world came looking. It just wasn't looking for me. I need to go back, because you cannot understand why I stood in that lab at 40, capping vials exactly level, while an heiress who could not smell insulted me in front of the interns, unless you understand what it cost to become that quiet. Silence like mine is not a temperament. It is a wound that healed crooked. Reverie was dying when I first walked into it. This is the part no one tells at the galas. The house that would later be called iconic was 12 years ago, 3 months from insolvency, running on a name that used to mean something, and a lab that smelled of desperation and expired naturals, of oils gone flat, of orris butter kept too long, of a bench where good work had stopped happening before I arrived. I remember the smell precisely because I have made a life of remembering smells, and because a place that is failing has an accord all its own. Cold radiators, cheap solvent, and under it, the particular staleness of hope that has been asked to wait too many times. Old Antoine Beaumont had died leaving debts and a daughter with a famous surname and no gift. They hired me because I was cheap and hungry, and because Julian Croft, though he wouldn't remember the girl I was then, weathered as I've become, my name worn down to something I let them mispronounce. Julian Croft had smelled a strip I'd blotted at a supplier's counter and told them, quietly, that the young one had a nose worth more than the building. I did not know I was cheap. I thought I had been chosen. I want to be fair about it even now, because grief that isn't fair is just noise, and I made myself a colder instrument than that. Giselle Beaumont was not born a thief. She was born into a name too heavy to carry and no way to carry it. She had grown up in a house of scent, unable to smell it. I understood that later, and it changed the shape of my hatred, though it did not lessen it. What she had instead was radiance. She could walk into a room of buyers and make them feel that luxury was a thing she exhaled. That is a real gift. It simply is not perfumery, and the two got confused, and I was the confusion that had to be cleared away. The Ember Accord took me 14 months. I can still walk it in my mind the way you walk a house you grew up in. The top was cold, a bergamot pressed sharp, a breath of pink pepper, a green so thin it was almost the idea of a stem. The heart turned unexpected, not floral where you braced for floral, but a dry iris laid over immortelle, that maple and tobacco warmth. With a thread of saffron I had to titrate to the milligram or it went medicinal. And the base. The base was the argument the whole thing was making. Birch tar tamed with benzoin and a labdanum I'd aged myself. Ambergris tincture for the lift. And then the thing that made grown perfumers go silent when they smelled it. A base accord I had built that behaved like memory itself, that seemed to recede and return, warm and then cooler, present and then only implied. A 20th note. My grandmother's note, though she never smelled it either. She was already gone by then. I built it out of what she'd taught my hands before my mind was old enough to keep the lessons. Elena Santos picked flowers for a living in a distillation town where the whole valley smelled in May like the inside of a bottle no one had bottled yet. The pickers went out before the sun because the oil is highest in the flower in the cold and burns off with the heat, and so my grandmother's whole art was a thing done in the dark and finished before anyone with a name was awake to see it. She taught me to work that hour, and I have never left it. She could name a field blind. She would tie a scarf over her eyes to amuse me and walk a row and say, jonquil, then narcissus, then the wild rose that grew where the drainage was bad. And she was never wrong, not once, and she was paid by the kilogram and her name is on nothing. There is a picture of her hands. That is all I have of her professionally. A photograph of hands, cracked at the knuckle, cupping tuberose at 4 in the morning before the heat could ruin the oil. She told me a thing when I was 7 that I did not understand until I was 31 and standing in a lawyer's office being erased. A scent remembers the hands that gathered it, even when the label forgets. She meant it as comfort. She did not know she was describing a crime. I gave Reverie the Ember Accord in the spring. By autumn, it was the house signature, and by winter, I was gone. Here is how it is done, in case you think it requires villainy. It requires almost none. It requires only that the person who made the thing be, on paper, a thing that cannot make it. There was a fund behind the house by then, Alistair Finch's fund, though I would not learn to hate that name properly for another decade, when it grew a son. Finch money saw what I had made and understood it the way a butcher understands a field, as yield. The play was simple, and it was elegant, and I have since watched it run so many times I could recite it in my sleep. You take the maker's formula while the maker still trusts you. You put a sellable name on it. And then, this is the necessary cruelty, the part that isn't optional. You make the real maker unemployable, because a real maker with a voice is a lawsuit and a headline. But a real maker no one will believe is just a bitter woman with a story. They called a meeting I thought was a celebration. Arthur Sterling was younger then and already smooth. He slid a folder across the bench and told me the house was formalizing everyone's contributions, that the Ember composition was a collaborative housework, that I had been a valued technician on the project. Technician. The word did the whole job. Giselle sat at the end of the table and did not meet my eyes and said, in that voice made for buyers, that a perfume is nothing until it has the right name on the bottle. She said it to comfort herself, I think, not to wound me, which was worse. And when I stood up, when I raised my voice for the only time in this entire story, when I said the accord was mine and I could prove it note by note, they had already built the answer. The answer was that I was difficult, that I was a lab tech who had overreached, that the poor girl had convinced herself she'd composed the house signature and had to be let go for the good of everyone. So sad. Such promise, if only she'd known her place. It went out through the industry the way scent goes through a room. Not announced, just present, everywhere, by morning. No one had to lie outright. That is the genius of it, and the horror. They only had to let a shape stand. The overreaching tech, the sad girl, the promising nose who couldn't handle a proper house. A story like that needs no author. Everyone becomes its author, a little, each time they repeat it, lowering their voice as though out of kindness. By the time it reached the third house, it no longer had a source. It was simply known. The way a field's flowers are simply known, except that this was a field of one, and I was standing in the middle of it watching them harvest my name. I went to houses that had courted me a season before and watched the temperature drop the moment I gave it. A rising perfumer with a formula is a prize. A difficult ex-technician with a grievance is a liability you smell before she's through the door. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. They had decided. And I got to see all of them clearly for the first time. I lost the formula. I lost my name, the working name, the one the trade press had once captioned under a photograph, E. Vance, perfumer, in a magazine I no longer let myself open. I lost the man I was going to build a life with, because grief that has nowhere to go turns on the nearest warm thing, and I let it, and he was gone by spring. I lost the belief my grandmother had handed me with the tuberose, that the hands would be remembered. The label had forgotten. The label had, in fact, been designed to forget. I did not break loudly. I want that understood, because the version where the wronged woman screams and is dragged out is the version they'd have preferred. It would have confirmed the story. I went quiet instead. I went so quiet that everyone assumed I had gone away. I hadn't gone away. I had gone underground. There is a registry, the Perfumers Guild keeps it, where a nose may lodge a formula under a sealed signature, identity held in escrow, so that authorship can be proven without the maker ever surfacing. It exists for people who compose for houses that forbid them a name, for ghosts and hired hands and the quietly ashamed. I had never intended to use it. 6 months after they threw me out, sleeping in a rented room that smelled of other people's cooking, I built a formula better than Ember, cleaner, stranger, more sure of itself. And I lodged it under a sealed signature because I had no house to lodge it under and no name they'd let me use. It was the 6th complete composition of my life, and I named the signature for that and for the direction I had decided to travel, which was away and up and cold and true. North 6. I did not plan a decade. No one plans a decade. You plan a week, and then the week works, and you plan another. A boutique house licensed North 6's 6th formula and could not keep it on the shelves. A second house came asking. Within 2 years, there was a whisper in the trade about an anonymous nose you could commission if you could find the broker, if you could afford it, if you understood that you would never meet her and never print her name. The whisper became a reputation. The reputation became, though I say it without warmth, an institution. Half the fragrances the critics called visionary in that decade came off my bench in the dark. Licensed through a holding company I built for exactly one purpose and named, with the only sentiment I allowed myself, Greywater Atelier, for the gray light before dawn, for the atelier I'd been denied, for water that finds the low ground and waits. And here is the part that would sound like invention if I had not lived every hour of it. The House of Rêverie hired North 6. They never knew. 4 or 5 years on, the ember well had run dry. A signature is not a spring, it does not refill. And Giselle could not compose a replacement because Giselle could not compose. And the house that had built its revival on stealing one formula from me now quietly, through a broker, through layers, commissioned its new masterpieces from the anonymous nose the industry revered. From me. I sat in my rented dark and read their commission and understood the full architecture of what was being asked. And I laughed until it stopped being laughter. And then I said yes. You will want to know why. I have had 10 years to phrase it, and I still only half can. The clean answer is penance, and it is not mine. It is theirs, extracted without their knowledge. I could not make the world remember the hands, but I could make sure the hands were mine. Every fragrance that house sold as its soul for a decade came out of me, and they paid Greywater Atelier for the privilege, and the money did the second thing, the patient thing, the thing that took years. I bought back Ember's guild registration when Finch's fund, over-leveraged and careless, let it lapse into a portfolio sale. I bought my own stolen formula back through 3 shell layers so no one would see the buyer's face. And then, I kept buying. The house's formula archive when they hawked it as collateral in a bad year. Slices of the house's debt, when the debt came to market, quiet and cheap and unglamorous. The kind of paper vultures pick over and I picked cleaner. Until one gray morning I sat with the ledger and understood that I owned, through Greywater, the archive of everything Rêverie had ever sold, and enough of its debt to be the hand on its throat, and the sealed registration proving that the anonymous genius they honored was the technician they'd thrown out. I held the house's soul in a folder. It sat in a fireproof box in a rented office Greywater kept under a name 3 removes from mine. The guild's sealed registration for North 6 with its escrow seal unbroken. The reclaimed ember paper, the deed to an archive of formulas the whole trade believed belonged to Rêverie, and enough of the house's debt to unmake it in an afternoon. Any one of those pages, laid on the right desk, ends them. I had all of them, and I did nothing with it. That is the part I have to be honest about, because a woman who could end them and chose not to for 10 years is either a saint or something colder, and I am not a saint. I did nothing because ending them would have ended the only room that ever felt like mine. Because I had grown to love the lab crew who did not know me, Elodie's black humor at 3 a.m., the growers whose contracts I quietly protected through Greywater without their ever knowing there was a hand above the hand. Because I was, God help me, watching. You find out what a house truly is at 4 in the morning, alone at the organ, when the label is off and only the accord is left. And I found out. I graded them. 10 years of a grade no one knew they were sitting for. I watched who was kind when they thought no one who mattered was looking, and who was cruel to the invisible. And I kept the ledger in my head where they'd never think to look for it, in the lab tech's head, in the machine that happened to breathe. Penance and vigil and a grade. And under all of it, if I am telling the truth in the gray light, the thing I could not name. I did not want revenge so much as I wanted them to have been worth it. I wanted to find, some 4 in the morning, a reason they had been allowed to take everything. There wasn't one. I kept looking anyway. That is not strength. That is a wound healed crooked, doing the only thing crooked things can do, which is hold. I learned Giselle's secret slowly, the way you learn a person's real accord under the perfume they wear to hide it. She could not smell. Not truly, not the 20th note, not the structure under the structure. She could catch a top note and perform recognition, could say bergamot with the confidence of a woman who has never been wrong in public because no one dares correct her. But the dry down, the argument a fragrance makes an hour in when the label has long since evaporated and only the accord remains, that was silence to her. Near anosmia, the trade calls it when it's partial, a nose that reads the loud and misses the deep. She had built a life as the great nose of a great house on a sense she did not possess, and she had covered it the way I covered my name, and the symmetry of that was so exact it stopped being satisfying and became something almost unbearable to hold. She never smelled the 20th note, not in ember she stole, not in a single formula I fed the house for 10 years. It was in every one of them, my grandmother's note, the hands remembering, and it passed under the nose of the woman who signed her name to all of it, and she never knew it was there. The thief could not perceive the thing she'd stolen. There is a justice in that, so quiet, it makes no sound at all. So why now? 10 years of holding, and then a Tuesday, and I break the vigil. You are owed that, because of the girl. Sofia Navarro came into the lab 18 months ago, 24 years old, with a nose I recognized before she'd finished her first sentence, because it was mine. The young one, the hungry one, the one who blots a strip at the supplier's counter and can't hide what she smells on her face. She stayed late for no credit. Some fixed a batch on her own time and let another tech take the thanks, and I watched her do it, and I marked the grade, and my hand was not steady when I marked it. Pass. They were grooming her exactly as they had groomed me, praise her privately, use her publicly, and when she got a voice, hand her a folder that called her a technician on a collaborative housework. I had seen the whole road. I had walked it, and I sat in the dark and understood, with the cold, total clarity of 4 in the morning, that my vigil had a cost I had refused to count. While I watched and graded and held my folder and told myself patience was a virtue, they were building the next erased maker, the next hidden nose, and her name was Sophia, and if the sale went through, she would be gutted with the rest of the lab before she ever knew there'd been a woman above her keeping the growers fed. I watched her at the organ one night, not knowing I was there. She never knew I was there. That was the whole architecture of my life, building a small accord for no one, on her own solvent, because she could not build. She had a bergamot too cold and a heart she'd overloaded, and a base she didn't yet trust, and she stopped, and frowned, and reached for the birch tar, and pulled her hand back because the house formula didn't call for it, and I understood in that motion everything that was going to be done to her. She had the note in her. She would learn to pull her hand back from it every time, because the formula the house handed her would never have her name on it, and never make room for the thing only she could smell, and in 10 years she would either be gone or be me. A ghost feeding masterpieces to the people who'd erased her, keeping a folder she was afraid to open. I had made my peace with being that woman. I discovered, watching a girl pull her hand back from the birch tar, that I could not make peace with 2 of us. I could hold the house's soul in a folder while it was only my soul in there. I could not do it once it was hers too. And then the sale, which was not what they said it was. I knew that already, knew it in my hands the way Elena knew a field, that the revival was a cover and there was a buyer, and I had spent the last day deciding to find out who. But the sale is the trigger, not the reason. The reason had a name, and it was Sophia, and behind her name were all the others, and behind all of them, 12 years back, the girl I used to be, standing up at a bench for the only time in her life to say the accord was mine, and being told, gently, by a woman in a voice made for buyers, that she should have known her place. Giselle Beaumont put her name on the perfume that ended my life. Tomorrow she planned to sign away one more. She was not getting a third signature without mine. Chapter 4. The Buyer. Cold vetiver came off the shredder bins first. the resinous, earthy bite of documents that had been printed, panicked over, and destroyed the same afternoon. Fresh toner has a smell. So does fear, if you have spent a lifetime learning to read a room by what it leaves in the air. At 1:40 in the morning, the Reverie business floor smelled of both, and of the cheap sandalwood candle Clara burned in her office to cover the fact that she smoked at her desk when the sale was going badly. I let myself in with the key I was never supposed to have, and the badge that opened every door in the building because someone, years ago, had decided the sample tester needed access to the raw materials vault at odd hours and never thought about it again. That was the whole trick of me. Nobody thinks about the person who cleans the blotters. They lock the important doors and hand the woman in the stained lab coat the ring that opens all of them, because a lock is meant to keep out someone who matters, and I did not matter. To the building, I was simply the knight. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. They had decided that about me 12 years ago. It was the most expensive decision the House of Rêverie ever made, and it was still accruing interest. I started with the shredder. Arthur Sterling believed in shredding the way superstitious men believe in salt over the shoulder, a ritual gesture against a fate he half suspected was already on its way. What Arthur did not know, because he had never once in 9 years looked at me long enough to wonder what I did after hours, was that the executive shredder was a cross-cut model rated for 8 sheets, and Arthur fed it 12 at a time, in a hurry, and 12 sheets through an 8-sheet crosscut come out in strips, not confetti. Strips can be laid out on a lab bench under a loop like blotters fanned in a grading flight, top note to base, and read. I had been reading Arthur's strips for 3 weeks. Tonight there was a fat handful in the bin, still warm at the core the way paper is when it's been sitting compressed. I gathered them into the flat document case I carried for exactly this, and I did not read them there. You never read in the room. You read at the organ, alone, at 4 in the morning, when the label is off and only the accord is left, and paper has an accord too. I moved to the offices. Giselle Beaumont did not lock her desk. A locked drawer is a confession that there is something to find, and Giselle's entire life was the performance of a woman with nothing to hide and a family gift for scent. Her desk was a stage set, the good pen she never wrote with, the framed cover that had called her the last true nose of the old school, a bottle of the flagship, my flagship, turned label out toward the visitor's chair so that everyone who sat across from her name on the glass. In the second drawer, under interview transcripts she'd had prettied up before publication, was the debt. Not the whole of it. Giselle was too vain to keep the whole of it where she'd have to look at it. But enough. A private banking summary, 3 months old, the kind a house sends to a principal when it has stopped sending polite reminders and started sending totals. The number at the bottom had commas in it that a fragrance house does not survive. I knew the number already. I held a good deal of that debt myself, quietly, through Greywater Atelier, the way a landlord you have never met holds the mortgage on the house you think you own. But it is one thing to know a number and another to see it in the drawer of the woman who once told a room full of interns that I was there to test the samples, not to have opinions about them. She had opinions about this number. There was a wine ring on the summary. She'd read it more than once, and not sober. I photographed it, level, the way I capped a vial. I put it back at the exact angle I'd found it, transcript layered on top, wine ring, aligned north. Invisibility is a discipline. You leave a room the way you leave a formula. Nothing added the maker didn't intend, nothing subtracted. The balance untouched, so that when they look at it in the morning, they smell only themselves. Then I went to Arthur's office, and Arthur's office was where the real perfume was. Arthur kept a second phone. Not hidden. Men like Arthur don't hide, they compartmentalize, which is hiding for people who think they're too clever to need to. It sat in the charging cradle behind his desk, a plain black slab, and its screen woke when I moved it because Arthur had never set a lock on the device he used for the conversations he most needed locked. He trusted the building, a night watchman who slept, cameras that pointed at the doors and not the desks, and a sample tester with a key ring, the way you trust a thing you've decided is beneath noticing. I did not need to open the phone. It told me what I needed on the wake screen, a preview of a message, time-stamped 6:14 that evening, from a contact saved as MLG-DC. The strips confirmed the rest. I laid them out at the organ at 4:11 a.m., the whole flight of them, and I read the accord of the sale the way I read a fragrance, Top notes first, the pretty part they meant for the public. Then the heart, where the real thing lives. Then the base, the dry down. The part that only comes up hours later when everyone who was going to be impressed has already gone home. The top note was the story they were selling to the industry. Revival. Expansion. The House of Rêverie enters a bold new era of growth under strategic partnership. Clara's language that, I found the draft in the strips, the phrases she'd tried 3 ways before landing on the one that hid the most. A house does not describe itself as revived unless it needs you not to notice it is being buried. The heart was Meridian Luxury Group. I knew the name the way you know a smell you can't place until suddenly you can, and then you can never unknow it. Meridian was not a perfume house. Meridian did not make anything. Meridian was a fund, a private thing that bought old names with real ateliers behind them and performed a procedure it called unlocking value. The same procedure every time, printed in the strips in a slide deck's flat font. Rationalize production footprint, which meant close the lab. Transition to contract manufacturing, which meant fire the perfumers and the raw materials master and buy the juice by the drum from whoever bid lowest. Optimize the naturals supply chain, which meant tear up the contracts with the growers, Elena's people, the pickers, the hands that gathered, and replace iris root and real ambergris with the synthetic that costs 1/10 as much and smells, to anyone who has smelled the true thing, like the photograph of a flower described to you over the phone. Extend brand equity across adjacent categories, which meant the name Rêverie on a body spray, on a candle, on a hand soap, on anything, on everything, licensed until it meant nothing at all, which is what Giselle had always believed a perfume was until it had the right name on the bottle. Except now the right name would be on a $2 aerosol and the bottle would be plastic. That was the base note. That was the dry down. Gut the lab, fire the hands, cheapen the juice, license the name onto anything, and walk away in 18 months with the value unlocked and the house, the real house, the 4 in the morning house, the organ and the vault and the growers and the craft, dead on the bench. And the managing partner, the man whose initials sat in Arthur's phone under MLG, the man the whole quiet catastrophe answered to, was named in the strips on the signature line of the intent letter, printed and initialed and shredded and reassembled by me under a loop at the organ. Victor Finch. I set down the loop. There is a hush at 4 in the morning that the day never gives you, and in it I heard my grandmother's voice, because a scent remembers the hands that gathered it even when the label forgets, and some names are a scent. Finch was a scent. 12 years ago, the fund that bankrolled the House of Rêverie through the season it took my Ember Accord and buried my name, the money that made it possible to take a young perfumer's finest work, dress it in an heiress's family gift, and blacklist the maker so no one in the industry would ever hire her or believe her. That fund had been run by a man named Alistair Finch. I sat with that for a while. The organ held its 300 bottles in the dark, iris and vetiver and the resins, ambergris and wet stone, and I let the name settle into its true shape. Alistair Finch bought a maker cheap, erased her, and kept the name. His son had learned at his knee. Victor Finch was going to do it again, the same procedure, take the makers, erase the hands, keep the name and hollow it, except this time not to one perfumer in one lab. This time to the whole house, to Julian and Elodie and Sophia, and the growers and the craft itself, at scale. The playbook run again by the boy who'd inherited it, against the same house, with the same money, while the woman who'd survived it the first time stood in the dark, refilling the fragrance library before dawn. The same playbook. I had lived inside it once. I knew every note of it. And a nose who has smelled a poison once can name it blind across a room. I made 3 columns in my head, the way I always did, the way my grandmother taught me to name a field before I ever touched a bottle, by the hands. Always by the hands. Arthur Sterling. The kickback was in the strips, a consultancy fee, a transition advisory retainer, a number payable to a shell on the close of the sale, and it was obscene. And it was the number of a man being paid to make the crew accept their own funeral quietly. Arthur was not selling the house because it was failing. Arthur was making it fail loudly enough that the sale looked like mercy and taking a fee to hold the door. Fail. I had graded him fail a long time ago, but a grade can deepen. This was Arthur dropping a full octave. Clara Mendez. Complicit, the press posture, the drafts. But there was something in her strips that Arthur's didn't have, a version she'd killed. A paragraph about honoring the artisans in transition, about the atelier's legacy, a sentimental thing she'd typed and then cut because it did not survive contact with the deal. Clara knew what they were doing. Clara had, for one paragraph, minded. Then she'd shredded the paragraph and kept the job. Fail. But I filed the killed paragraph anyway. A weak link is still a link, and the ones who flinch once will flinch again, later, in front of the right pressure. I do not forgive on credit. But I note who trembles. Giselle Beaumont, the debt, the wine ring, the woman who could not smell the 20th note of her own signature fragrance, selling the house her name was carved into because she had spent it faster than I could compose it, and telling herself, I knew she was telling herself, that a partnership with Meridian was a rescue and not a burial, because Giselle had always been able to smell exactly what she needed to smell and nothing more. Fail. But Giselle was not the final boss of this. Giselle was the name on the bottle. She had never once in her life been the thing inside it. The thing inside it this time was Victor Finch. I met him 31 hours before the gala. He came to the lab. They came through at 11 in the morning, Arthur in his good suit doing the warm voice he used for buyers, the one that made the lab crew glance at each other because they'd only ever heard the other one. Clara behind him with the tablet. Giselle floating through her own atelier like a guest at her own funeral who has not yet been told. And between them, a man I had never seen and knew at once, because some people arrive smelling of the thing they intend to do to you. Victor Finch smelled of money that had never had to be loud. A fine, quiet leather. A vetiver so clean and so expensive, it had had every speck of the earth washed out of it. Vetiver with the dirt taken out, which is to say, the soul taken out, which is to say exactly the man. The scent of someone told he had impeccable taste so many times he had stopped needing to demonstrate it. He moved through the lab looking at the equipment the way a man looks at a room he is about to have repainted. And this is the lab, Arthur said in the warm voice, gesturing at the whole of our lives. It's charming, Victor Finch said. Charming. The word you use for a thing you find small. There's real romance in it. He said romance the way the slide deck said craft, a line item, a thing to be liquidated with dignity in the press release. He turned, taking in the organ, 300 bottles, 10 years of my life, and I watched him price it. Then he reached the bench where I stood, and without breaking his sentence, without turning his head, without registering that the space he was walking into was already occupied by a person, Victor Finch shrugged out of his coat and held it out to the side. He held it at me. Into the air where a coat rack or a hook or a person-shaped convenience ought to be, because a man like that has spent his whole life in rooms where a hand appears to take the coat, and the hand is never attached to anyone he needs to see. He did not look. He never once looked. He was talking to Arthur about square footage, and his arm came out with the coat in it, and he waited, with the flat certainty of a man who has never had to wait more than 1 second, for the coat to be taken. I took the coat. Fine wool. Cold from the car. Heavier than it looked. Good tailoring is heavy. It smelled of the clean vetiver and of leather, and under that, very faint, the paper and toner smell of a man who had signed a great many documents that morning. I held it over my arm, level, the way I capped a vial, and I stood there being the hook he'd reached for, and I graded him. He gave me one line before they moved on. He'd caught, maybe, some stillness in the woman holding his coat. Some people can feel a nose reading them. And he glanced, finally, not at me, but at the badge clipped to my coat, the way you check the make of a chair. "You've been here a while," he said. Not a question. A man like Victor Finch does not ask the furniture questions. "Long service. That's lovely. You know," and here he smiled, a good smile, one that had closed 100 deals, warm and terrible. In transitions like this, the people who make it easy are always taken care of, and the people who make it difficult. He let it hang, still not quite looking at me. "Well, difficult people have a way of not being here very long. It's nothing personal. It never is." He took his coat back out of my arms without a thank you, the transaction complete, and rejoined the tour. "Now the vault." "I'd love to see the vault." "Nothing personal. It never is. That was the whole Finch playbook in 4 words, the fathers and the sons. The taking of a maker's life reframed as a market condition. Nobody's fault, just the unlocking of value. It had not been personal when Alistair Finch's money erased Eliza Vale either. It had just been a Tuesday. Fail, I wrote in the ledger no one could read. Not the sharp, fast fail of a Arthur or a Clara. A cold and total one. The failing grade you give the thing at the root, the note in the bass that poisons the whole accord, the 20th note of him, the one nobody else in that room could smell. That he had walked into a house full of hands that made beautiful things, and he had not seen a single hand, because he had already decided the hands were the part you throw away. He had handed his coat to the woman who owned the debt he was leveraging, and the formula archive he was buying, and the guild registration under North 6 that made every fragrance in that gutted lab legally, unmistakably, hers. He had handed his coat to the mortgage, and he had not looked. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. Victor Finch had just told me exactly who he was, and he thought he'd told me nothing, because he thought he'd been talking to a hook. I locked the lab that night the way I always did. I reset the fragrance library, every bottle turned label out, every strip binned, the organ restored to the order only I kept, so that at dawn it would look untouched by any hand, which is a lie a maker tells, because a maker's hands are all over everything, and the whole art is that you can't see them. I filed the photographs, the strips, Clara's killed paragraph, and Arthur's obscene fee, and Giselle's wine ring, and the intent letter with Victor Finch's initials, and the name that closed the circle 12 years wide. I had it all now. The buyer, the plan, the kickback, the complicity, the debt, the name of the son who was running his father's procedure on the whole house at once. They had 31 hours. So did I. I was reaching for the light when I heard them come back, Arthur and Clara, late, thinking the lab empty, thinking themselves alone in a dark building with no one who mattered awake to hear. I stood still between the organ and the door, in the one blind spot where the corridor light didn't reach, and I let them talk. Because the second best intelligence in the world is the shredder, and the best is a man who believes the room is empty. The writer, Arthur was saying, the one from the Fragrance Quarterly. She's been asking the apprentice questions, Reyes. The Reyes girl's been feeding her, the Naturals story, the growers, the whole sob sister angle. If that runs before the close, it complicates the narrative. So handle the narrative, Clara said. I'd rather handle the girl. The click of Arthur's expensive lighter. She's rallying the lab, Sophia. She's got Belle half on her side and she's talking to press. Finch was clear. No noise before the signing. A difficult apprentice is noise. Better she's gone before the gala. Cleaner. On what grounds? We'll find grounds. The lighter again. We always find grounds. She's 24 and she trusts everyone. It won't be hard. They decided it there, in the dark, over a cigarette, the way Alistair Finch's people had once decided me, that the gifted young one who trusted everyone and defended the powerless and could actually, unmistakably smell, was a problem to be removed before she made noise the buyer wouldn't like. They said her name the way you say a stain. Sophia. A thing to be handled. Gone before the gala. I stood in the dark and did not move and graded them one more octave down, and under the grade something older than the ledger turned over in me, because I had been the 24-year-old who trusted everyone. I had been the one they found grounds for. I knew exactly how this went, note by note, because I had been the fragrance they threw out and relabeled, and I had spent 12 years learning that a house will always decide the true maker is the disposable one. They thought Sofia Navarro was a problem to remove. I had decided something else about Sofia Navarro a long time ago, in 100 small, unseen acts of craft, in the way she gave up credit and sleep and defended a sample tester no one else would look at. They saw the last thing they'd throw away. I saw the first thing worth saving, the next true nose, young me reborn with the gift intact and the erasure not yet finished. The whole future of everything I'd rebuilt in silence, standing in a lab coat that fit her the way mine used to fit me. They had decided she was the end of something. I had decided she was the beginning of it. One of us was about to be proven right. Chapter 5. The Frame. The lab smelled wrong at 7 in the morning, and that was how I knew. Not wrong the way a spoiled batch smells wrong, the sour, oxidized turn of citrus gone to rancid oil. This was wrong in a cleaner way, a staged way. Someone had wiped the benches down with the harsh solvent we used only for a full teardown, and under that sting I caught the faint brightness of a vial opened and recapped by a hand that did not love it. A hand in a hurry. A hand that did not know that raw jasmine absolute, cracked open and left to breathe for even a minute, leaves a fingerprint in the air for an hour. I had come in early, the way I always came in early, to reset the fragrance library. I stood in the doorway with my coat over my arm and read the room the way my grandmother taught me to read a field before the pickers went in. Not with my eyes, with the back of my throat. Someone had been here in the dark. Someone had touched Sophia's station. Sophia Navarro kept the tidiest bench in the house. She labeled everything twice, in a small square hand, and when she thought no one was watching, she would hold a blotter to the light and turn it, slow, the way you turn a thing you love. This morning her bench was a fraction off. The batch ledger sat open at the wrong page. Her spare key card, which she kept clipped to the lanyard she never took off, lay beside the master maceration tank, the tank that held the naturals for the flagship, the perfume of the year, the one Giselle would lift on stage tomorrow night and call her family's gift. Her key card, left out, as if she had used it and forgotten it, as if she had come in the night and done something she needed a key for. I did not touch it. I capped the vial on the nearest strip exactly level, and I went to wash the blotters, and I listened. Pass. That was Sophia's grade, and it had never wavered. You find out what a perfume truly is at 4 in the morning, alone at the organ, when the label is off and only the accord is left. And you find out what a person truly is the same way, in the hour when they think no one is grading. Now someone was building something in the dark against the one person in this house who had never once earned a fail. They came at 8:30, Arthur Sterling and Clara Mendez, together, which they were never together this early unless there was a fire to set. Arthur had a voice he used for buyers and a voice he used for us, and he had forgotten, the way men like Arthur always forget, that the sample tester washing beakers at the sink had ears. He was on the phone when he came in, and he was using the buyer voice, warm as heated amber, and then he saw only the lab crew and me, and he let it drop into the other register, the flat one, the one that costs nothing. "It's handled," he said into the phone. "By tonight it's clean. The apprentice is the problem. She's the one rallying them. She's the one who called that journalist. You remove the head, the body stops walking. Give me the afternoon." He hung up. Clara had a folder under her arm and a face arranged into concern, which on Clara was a color she applied, not a thing she felt. Concern was this season's look. "Where's Reyes?" Arthur asked the room. "Sourcing run," Julian Croft said from the raw materials bench. "Won't be back till noon. She's checking the tuberose delivery herself since somebody has to." He did not look up. Julian never gave Arthur the gift of his eyes. "Good," Arthur said, and did not hear how it sounded. And that was the thing about Arthur. He was a snake who thought he was a diplomat, and a snake that admires its own reflection will strike in front of a mirror. I dried a beaker. I set it on the rack. I picked up another. They went to Sophia's bench. I watched them in the black glass of the cabinet doors, the way you can watch a whole room if you have spent 10 years learning to be furniture. Clara opened the folder. Arthur took 2 vials from his own coat pocket, his coat, not the lab stock, and a lab man notices whose glass comes from where. One vial was the flagship's heart accord, the true one, decanted small. The other was cheaper. I knew at the moment he unstoppered it because the room told me. A synthetic jasmine, a flat, honest workhorse of a molecule with none of the indole, none of the animal warmth, none of the living rot that makes real jasmine break your heart a little. A body spray jasmine, a meridian jasmine. He poured a measure of the cheap one into a sample flask, labeled it in a hand that tried to be Sophia's small square hand, and set it into her rack among the real ones. Then he took her open ledger and made an entry, a substitution, dated last night, initialed with her initials. A spoiled batch, a swap. Proof, in her own book, in almost her own hand, that Sophia Navarro had watered down the perfume of the year with cheap stock the night before the gala. Sabotage. Or theft, because the second vial Arthur planted, I understood now, was the true heart accord, decanted and pocketed, the formula walking out the door in a girl's bag. Spoiled the batch, leaked the formula. Either story fired her before tomorrow night. Either story silenced the crew's defender and made her a cautionary tale instead of a witness. Clara slid a printed page from the folder and laid it beside the ledger. A termination notice, dated today, waiting only for the batch results and a signature. She had brought the ending before the middle was written. That was the tell of a frame built by people who had never made anything with their hands. They always finish the perfume before they've smelled it. "We'll have Julian verify the batch is off spec at 11, Arthur said quietly. "He won't like it. He doesn't have to like it. The numbers will say what they say." "And if the girl denies it?" "Let her deny it. The book's in her hand, the card's on her bench. The journalist she's been feeding will drop her the second she's a thief instead of a saint." Arthur capped his cheap vial and pocketed it, satisfied. By tonight, the lab's quiet, the sale's clean, and there's nobody left who cares enough to make noise at the gala. Finch wants it tidy. I give the man tidy. Fail. I wrote it in the ledger nobody could read, the one behind my eyes, and I underlined it twice, once for Arthur and once for Clara. Not because they were cruel. Cruel would have been easier to forgive. Because they were tidy. Because they had looked at a girl who turned a blotter to the light like a thing she loved and seen only an obstacle to be filed. They left it there, the whole architecture of it, and walked out talking about seating charts. A frame, I have learned, is only as strong as what you let people keep. I could have swept it all into the sink in 90 seconds. Poured out the planted flask, torn the false ledger page, wiped the card clean of the story it was meant to tell. Sophia would come back at noon to a bench that had never been touched, and she would never know how close the axe had swung, and Arthur would learn only that his tidy thing had come apart in his hands, and he would build it again, smarter, and next time I might not smell the jasmine breathing in the dark. I did not touch it. You do not stop a man mid-lie. You let him finish it. You let him write it down, sign it, file it, build his whole clean structure and lean his full weight against it, and only then, when it is bearing everything he has, do you show him it was never load-bearing at all. I had spent 10 years learning the difference between winning an argument and collapsing a house. Tonight, I did not want Arthur's flask. I wanted his signature on the termination, Clara's on the batch report. Both of them committed in writing to a lie that the true batch logs and the library footage would turn into a confession. I wanted them to commit fully. I wanted the noose tied and the knot dressed and their own hands to have done all the work. So I guided it, gently. The way you guide an accord that wants to go somewhere, you'll let it, so long as it ends where you decide. I photographed the planted flask in its rack and the false entry in the ledger, time-stamped, before anything moved. Then I went to the shredder bin outside Arthur's office. I empty it at dawn. It is one of the invisible chores that gave me the run of this house. And I lifted out the afternoon's confetti and sat on the cold storeroom floor and read it strip by strip, the way you read a field, the way you name what's there. My hands remembered the work. There is a patience that lives in the fingers of anyone who has ever counted stamens or weighed 1/10 of a gram of something priceless, and I have both. The originals came up out of the confetti one shred at a time. A draft of the termination with an earlier date, they'd backdated it, then reprinted. A cheap stock invoice from a Meridian supplier, Jasmine synthetic, quantity small, delivery yesterday, delivered to Arthur and not to the lab. And best of all, in Clara's hand, a note to Arthur. Make sure the swap traces to R, not to us. R. Reyes. In writing. The frame confessing that it was a frame. I taped the shreds to a sheet in the storeroom and photographed that too. And then I did the thing they did not know I could do. The thing none of them knew existed. Because the batch logs and the fragrance library security footage did not answer to Arthur Sterling or to Giselle Beaumont. They answered, through a chain of holding paper none of them had ever read carefully, to the anonymous formula holder of record, to Greywater Atelier, to the sealed guild signature that owned the archive this house had been renting its own soul back from for a decade. To North 6. To me. A locked system means nothing to the one who holds the deed to the lock. I pulled last night's footage. It showed a man in a coat that was not lab stock at Sophia's bench at 2:14 a.m., pouring from a vial he took from his own pocket, writing in a book that was not his. It showed her key card lying exactly where he set it down. I had them. I had all of it. The flask, the false ledger, the backdated notice, the Meridian invoice, the "are not us" note, the footage of Arthur's own hand doing the crime he'd built for a girl. Enough to end them before lunch. I put it away. Every piece. I set the trap's teeth and I closed the box and I went back to washing blotters, because tomorrow night the whole industry would be in that room. And a fail is worth so much more when the people who earned it are standing on a stage they built to honor themselves. Let them commit. Let them sign. Let them get all the way to dawn. Elodie found me in the storeroom at 11, and Elodie found me out. She came in for label stock and caught me taping the last shred to the sheet, and she stopped in the doorway, and I watched her eyes go from the ruined termination to the Meridian invoice to my hands. My hands. The old scar across the back of the right one, a pale seam where a still had burned me 12 years and 1 lifetime ago, the night I made the Ember Accord and thought it would make my name instead of ending it. Elodie had been my friend in this house for 6 years and had never once asked about the scar. She looked at it now like it had started speaking. "I saw a photograph," she said slowly, "in an old trade rag, years back, before you. A young perfumer, some prodigy the industry ate. Caption said, E. Vance, perfumer. She had a burn on her hand. She read a whole accord off 1 blotter, and the writer thought she was showing off." Elodie's voice had gone very quiet. "You read the tuberose delivery off 1 strip last week, from across the room. I thought it was a party trick." I did not answer. In 10 years, I had never once let this happen. But I had let it happen now, in front of the shredded proof of a girl's framing, and I understood in that moment that some part of me had wanted it to, that I was tired, in a place under the cold steel, of being no one to the only people I loved. "Eliza." She said my name like she was testing whether it was a stage name. "Vale. It's your name. You didn't change it, you just let everyone stop hearing it." Her eyes filled, and Elodie Dubois did not cry. Elodie made jokes at funerals. "You've been here the whole time. You made all of it. The signature everybody worships. It was you the whole—" She pressed her hand to her mouth. "They call you the sample situation. Clara calls you the help, and you made the house. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one." Elodie had never once decided I was no one. That was her whole grade, 6 years long. Pass, and pass, and pass. "Sit down," I said. "I'll tell you what I can. Not all of it, enough to make you useful, because I'm going to need a second pair of hands that nobody in this building would ever suspect, and you just volunteered." She sat down on an upturned crate. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, and she looked at the taped sheet of shredded lies, and she was already, God love her, working. "They're framing the kid," she said. "It wasn't a question. They are. And you're not stopping it." "I'm letting it finish," I said. "There's a difference, and by tomorrow night you'll love it." Elodie Dubois looked at me for a long moment, my oldest friend, seeing me for the first time. Then she picked up a fresh shred, matched its torn edge to the sheet, and became my right hand between one breath and the next. "Tell me where you keep the rest," she said. Julian Croft came to me at dusk, and he brought grief with him like a raw material he'd carried too long. The batch, verification, had happened. Arthur had leaned on him at 11, exactly as planned, and Julian had run the numbers, and the planted flask had read exactly as cheap as it was, and the ledger had said what Clara wrote it to say, and Sofia Navarro had come back from her sourcing run at noon to find her key card on a bench she hadn't touched, and a termination notice with her name on it. She had denied it. Of course she had denied it. It had not mattered. Of course it had not mattered, because the book was in her hand and the card was on her bench, and that is the whole terrible efficiency of a frame. It makes the truth sound like the alibi. Julian had signed nothing. He had said the batch was off-spec because the batch he was handed was off-spec, which was true, and he hated that it was true, and he had gone home and turned around and come back, and now he stood at my bench in the empty lab with his cap in his hands. "I want to show you something," he said, "and I don't know why it has to be you, except that you're the only one in this house who'd understand what it costs." He set a small vial on the bench. Old. The handwriting on it was his, decades younger. "Naturals I milled a long time ago," he said. "For a young perfumer. Rising thing, real gift, the real kind. The kind you can't fake, the kind that reads a field blind." She built an accord out of what I ground for her that I have never smelled the equal of, before or since. Warm and burnt and alive, like a hearth in a stone house. He turned the vial in the light, slow, and I saw where Sophia had learned the gesture without ever knowing where it came from, because the craft passes down whether or not the names do. Ember, she called it. The lab went very quiet. The organ stood behind me, 300 bottles holding their breath. They took it, Julian said. The house. The money behind the house. Presented it as the family signature and put her out on the street as a lab tech who'd overreached, and blacklisted the word of her so thoroughly that no one in the trade would hire the girl or believe she'd made a thing. I watched it happen. I knew what I'd milled, and I knew whose hands built it, and I said nothing. His voice did not break. It was worse than breaking, it was steady, the steadiness of a wound gone hard. I kept my post. 12 years I've kept my post, and today I signed a batch report that hands a girl the exact same knife, and I told myself the numbers said what they said, the same lie, the exact same lie I told myself then. He looked at me. He did not know. He had no idea he was confessing my own erasure to my own face, that the vial on the bench held the naturals of my life's first true work, that the scar Elodie had recognized at noon was the scar I'd earned the night he milled that jasmine. He did not know that the young perfumer eaten by this house and the sample tester washing his blotters were the same woman, weathered now, in different glasses, going by nobody's name. Dramatic irony is a thing the reader carries. I carried it alone in that room, and it was the heaviest thing I have ever held level. Why tell me? I managed. Because you remind me of her, Julian said, and it landed in my chest like a note I could not name. The way you read the room, the way you cap a vial exactly level, like it's the last careful thing left in the world. She used to do that. I've been watching you do it for years and telling myself it was nothing. He put his weathered hand over the old vial, covering it. I don't want to be the man who said nothing twice, Eliza. Whatever you're doing, and you're doing something, I've smelled it on you for a week. You smell like a woman who's decided, I want in. For the girl, to pay back one I couldn't. Pass. I graded him and my hand was not steady, and I was glad the light was low. Then don't sign anything else, I said. Don't warn Sophia. Don't warn anyone. Come to the gala tomorrow, stand in the back, and when the room goes quiet, and it will go quiet, you'll understand everything, and you'll have paid your debt in full, and so will I. He held my eyes a moment longer. Something moved behind his, some old scent memory reaching for a name it couldn't catch, and then he let it go, because the woman he was grieving was pouring him this comfort, and he'd been taught by this house for 12 years that the hands are never the ones that matter. You sound like her too, he said softly, and picked up his cap and left me alone with the organ and the vial of my own stolen life sitting warm on the bench. I worked past midnight. Elodie had gone home with a list only she and I could read. The frame stood untouched at Sophia's bench, complete, signed by everyone but Julian, dated, filed, load-bearing, bearing the full weight of every liar in the building. The evidence that would collapse it sat sealed where no shredder or keycard could reach, because the deed to the lock was mine. At 4 a.m., you find out what a perfume truly is at 4 in the morning, alone at the organ. When the label is off and only the accord is left, I lifted the flagship one last time before its unveiling. The perfume of the year. My sixth and greatest, my North 6, 20 notes deep, and in the dry down, past the iris and the ambergris and the whetstone hush, the 20th note, the one I have built into every true thing I ever made. The bass accord no other nose can build or even find. Giselle would lift this bottle tomorrow and call it hers, and she would never once, in her whole near-anosmic life, have known the 20th note was there, waiting, my signature written where no spotlight ever reaches. Sophia was ruined on paper. Julian was carrying my grief and calling it hers. Elodie knew my name and was learning to hold it. And downstairs, in a folder I had also read, the sale papers waited. Meridian, Victor Finch, the same playbook his father ran on me, run again at scale, timed to close under cover of the very gala meant to honor the nose they'd all been washing blotters past for a decade. They were going to sell the house out from under us at dawn. Dawn was the deadline I had spent 10 years refusing to meet. Chapter 6. 4 in the morning. Cold air off the loading dock carried it to me before I saw anything wrong. A wrong sweetness, flat and cheap. The smell of a fragrance built to sell and not to last. It came up the service stairs the way rot comes up through floorboards, and I knew that smell the way you know a lie in a voice you love. Instantly, and in the body, before the mind agrees to it. I was standing at the organ with a blotter half dipped, and I set the strip down without capping the vial, which I never do. That is how I knew I was already afraid. Someone had opened the master batch of the flagship. 3:41 a.m. The lab was mine at that hour, the way it had been mine for 10 years. The long room of amber glass and steel, 300 bottles ranked on the organ like a choir holding its breath. The fragrance library sealed behind its climate door. The whole place lit in that particular chemical light that flatters nothing and forgives nothing. The perfume of the year sat in the cold locker at the end of the bench in its sealed decanters, 40 liters of it, the launch batch, the one the whole gala turned on. I had composed it. Every gram of it had come out of my hands over 11 months, top to heart to base, and then the base beneath the base, the 20th note that no one had asked for because no one knew it was there. It was the truest thing I had made since the one they took from me 12 years ago. And now it stank of the wrong thing. I crossed to the locker. The seal was cut. 2 of the decanters were gone, and in their place sat 2 others. Same shape, same house label, same batch code inked in Clara's careful marketing hand, filled with something the color of weak tea and smelling of it too. I lifted the stopper and the flat sweetness climbed into my sinuses and sat there like a stranger in my chair. Ethyl this, a synthetic musk that costs $11 a kilo, a rose note that had never been near a flower. A reformulation. Someone had swapped my launch batch for a cheap copy and left the copy wearing my label. I did not need to guess why. If the flagship they poured at the gala was garbage, the house looked finished, a name with nothing left inside it. And a finished house sells cheap and sells fast, and the crew that made it gets blamed for the ruin and cleared out on the way to the closing table. Spoil the batch, fire the maker, sign the papers while the room still smells of failure. It was elegant. I could have graded it if it hadn't been mine. Fail. I logged it where I log everything, behind my sternum, in the ledger no one can read. I found the rest of it in the next 10 minutes, moving through the dark with the flashlight off because I know this room in the dark better than most people know their own hands. The batch logs on the bench terminal had been altered. A spoilage entry backdated to yesterday, initialed with Sophia's login. Sophia, who had been walked out of the building 4 days ago with a box and a security escort and a lie stapled to her name. They were going to hang this on her too. The dead batch would be the proof that the girl they'd fired had sabotaged the house on her way out, and every honest hand in this lab would learn the lesson. Keep your head down, sign what you're told. The ones who care get erased. I had learned that lesson once. I had spent 10 years unlearning it in silence. My phone lit. A text from Julian Croft, sent 9 minutes ago, that I'd missed at the locker. Eliza. Trouble with the launch batch. Arthur locked the crew out of the building, badges dead. I'm outside. Are you in? I was in. I was always in. That was the one thing none of them had ever understood about the sample tester. I never actually left. I let Julian in through the delivery bay, the one door whose reader I had quietly kept off the central system for years, because a person who cleans up after everyone learns early which doors the house forgets it has. He came in out of the cold in his coat with his glasses fogging, 60-odd years of raw materials mastery in a body that moved slower now than his mind. And the sight of him steadied me the way a true bass note steadies a composition, the thing underneath that keeps the bright parts from flying apart. They cut the badges at midnight, he said. All of us. Said it was a system upgrade. Then I got a call from the fulfillment house. The gala pour is being handled by an outside vendor now, not us. Since when does the lab not pour its own flagship? He stopped. He'd caught the smell. His whole face changed. What is that? That, I said, is what they're planning to serve to 400 press and buyers tomorrow night with our name on it. I handed him the stopper. He didn't have to bring it to his nose twice. Julian milled naturals before half these executives were born. He could read a formula off the air of a room. He went gray. This isn't a mistake, he said quietly. This is a substitution. Yes. The real batch? 2 decanters gone, the rest still cold. I nodded at the locker. Whoever did it didn't take the whole thing. They didn't have to. They only needed enough missing to explain the shortfall, and enough bad in the bottles to explain the failure. He looked at me for a long moment, and there was something in his face I had learned to brace for over the last weeks. The ache of a man circling a memory he can't quite land on. You know, he said, years ago I watched something like this happen to a young perfumer. Her formula, taken. Her name, buried. I stood in a room and said nothing because I wanted to keep my post. He shook his head slowly. You remind me of her when you get quiet like this. I don't know why. She's been gone a long time. I capped the vial on the bench, exactly level, so my hands would have something to do that wasn't shaking. She's standing in front of you, I did not say. You milled the naturals for the accord they took. You never forgot that scent, and you have smelled it on my skin for 10 years and called it the house signature. I said, we don't have time for old ghosts, Julian. We have a batch to save and a building full of locked-out people. 3:58 a.m. She came in through the delivery bay the same way he had, because of course she did. I heard the door and turned, and it was Sofia Navarro in a coat 2 sizes too big, hood up, with the particular pallor of someone who has not slept properly since the day her name was taken from her. She should not have been anywhere near this building. There was a scandal with her fingerprints forged onto it, and a security order with her photograph on it, and she had walked into the exact place designed to convict her, at 4 in the morning, because she'd heard the crew was locked out and she could not stand to be safe while the others were in trouble. Elodie texted the group, she said before I could speak. The launch batch. I know I'm not supposed to be here. I don't care. Tell me what to do. I looked at her, the gift in her, the same as mine had been, the same danger circling it, and in the private ledger behind my ribs, I wrote the grade I had written for her weeks ago and never had cause to revise. Pass. Pass. In the dark, unpaid, unwatched, with everything to lose and nothing to gain but the work. There are perhaps 4 people in a life who earn that grade without knowing anyone is grading. She was one. I had already decided quietly that whatever I built out of the wreckage of this house would have her name over its door someday, in the light, where mine would never go. You'll help Julian inventory what's left of the real batch, I said, both of you. Every decanter, every gram, sealed and photographed with a timestamp. If they're going to say the batch was spoiled, we prove exactly how much of it was real and exactly when it went missing. You don't touch the terminal. You don't sign anything. You are a witness, not a technician. Do you understand the difference tonight? She understood. She was smarter than the people who fired her, which was, in the end, why they had. While they worked, I went into the fragrance library and shut the climate door behind me. And in that cold, sealed hush, 60 years of the house's soul in ranked glass, and half of it composed by hands the house would swear had only ever tested samples, I took out my phone and did the thing I had never once done in 10 years of watching. I moved. Not as the sample tester, as North 6. Here is what none of them knew, refilling their glasses in their bright offices upstairs. The master formula for the perfume of the year was not the house's. It was mine, registered, sealed, and lodged with the Perfumers Guild under the signature North 6, my 6th and greatest composition. The identity of its maker held under seal the way the Guild holds all its anonymous laureates. The house had a license to produce it. That was all. And a license runs through a production authority, a chain of custody for every liter poured under a Guild-registered formula. And that authority, if you followed it back through the paper, through the holding company that had quietly acquired it years ago, through Greywater Atelier, came to rest in one place. Me. I did not send a threat. Threats are for people who want to be seen refusing. I sent an authorization. One encrypted message from the registered production authority of Formula North 6 to the specialist fulfillment atelier that Greywater kept on retainer for exactly the emergencies rich houses are too proud to plan for. A small, expert night crew who could compound a Guild-registered formula from sealed master files under proper custody and courier it, certified, before a gala. The message flagged the house's outside vendor pour as unauthorized. A Guild-registered formula being reproduced off-label without the production authority's sign-off. It placed a hold. And it dispatched a true batch, compounded from the sealed master, the real thing, 20th note and all, to arrive at the gala venue's cold storage by evening, invoiced to Greywater, arriving as if by administrative miracle, arriving with no name on it that anyone at Reverie would recognize. The house would open its doors tomorrow night, believing it had gutted its own flagship, and would find, to its bafflement, that the flagship had saved itself. A ghost in the supply chain. A correction from nowhere. They would assume a clerk had caught the error, or a vendor had covered a mistake, and they would be too busy toasting the sale to ask which clerk, which vendor, which invisible hand had reached into their ruin and set the true cent back on the table. It was the first time in 10 years I had used the power instead of merely holding it. My hands were steady now. Cold bergamot at dawn, I could smell the morning coming up outside through the sealed door, the way you smell a thing you've waited for. The label was off. Only the accord was left. You find out what a house truly is at 4 in the morning, alone at the organ, when the label is off. And I had just found out what I truly was, too, which was not a woman who cleaned up after them. I was the reason there was anything left to clean. 4:14 a.m. I came out of the library and the batch was inventoried, and Julian was on the phone in the corner in a low, urgent voice, wrestling the logistics of a locked-out crew with the stubbornness of a man who has spent his life making sure the naturals arrive on time. Elodie had come in. I hadn't heard her. She moves like I do. And she was standing by the organ with 2 blotters fanned in her hand and an expression I'd been living with since the night she recognized me. Careful, tender, complicit. She knew. She'd known for weeks. She said nothing because she understood better than anyone that the whole thing turned on my staying no one for exactly 1 more day. "They're upstairs," she said quietly. "Arthur, Clara, Giselle came in an hour ago. There's a car in the executive bay, big one, not ours." Meridian, Victor Finch's car. The Vulture had come to watch the kill. "The signing," I said, fast-tracked. Elodie in accounting, the other Elodie, the one they actually see. She saw the closing docket. They moved it up. She let out a breath. "They scheduled it for the night of the gala. During the gala. They're going to sign the house away in a back room while the critics are still praising it out front." Of course they were. It was the same move, run again at scale, the way it had been run on me 12 years ago, and bankrolled by Alistair Finch's fund, and inherited now by Edmund's son, like a family trade. Take the maker's formula cheap, erase the maker, own the name, and do the signing while everyone's looking at the shine. Victor Finch didn't know he was finishing his father's sentence. He didn't know the young perfumer his father had erased had spent a decade quietly buying the debt his fund was counting on. He'd handed me his coat once, in this building, without looking at my face. People hand their coats to no one and never remember doing it. That is the whole secret of surviving as no one. They will say anything, do anything, plan anything in front of the help, because the help is a machine that happens to breathe. I went up. Not all the way, to the service corridor behind the executive floor, where the pantry connects to the boardroom through a door that the people in the boardroom have never once looked at, because the door is where the coffee comes from, and the coffee comes from nowhere. There was a tray there, and glasses, and a bottle of the good champagne they kept for closings. I have poured for them for 10 years. A woman in a lab coat with a tray is furniture that pours. I picked up the tray. Through the door I could hear them, and I stood in the dark of the pantry a moment first, the way you stand over the organ before the first blotter, taking the measure of the whole thing before you commit a hand to it. This was the last piece of the trap. I had all the rest. I had held it for weeks, the way you hold a dry down, letting it develop before you name it. Arthur's kickback, the wire he thought was buried, sitting in a folder in Greywater's file. The forged scandal against Sophia, the shredded originals reassembled, the backdated batch entry with its lie of a login. The Meridian deal in full, the gut the lab plan, the licensing of the name onto anything with a cap, the naturals contracts marked for tearing. The paper trail running back 12 years, tying Giselle and the Reverie House and Alistair Finch's fund to the taking of the Ember Accord and the burial of one perfumer's name. And under all of it, the base beneath the base. The Guild's sealed registration proving who North 6 was. The 20th note nobody else could build. My fingerprint in the dry down. The one piece of evidence that could not be forged, argued, or bought, because it lived in the scent itself, and only one nose alive could name it blind. I had everything, And standing in that pantry, I made the decision I had been circling for weeks, and it was not the decision of a woman who wanted quiet justice done quietly. I would let it proceed, all of it, exactly as they wanted. Let them keep the gala on the calendar. Let them invite the press and the buyers and the critic who called the genius behind the flagship a mystery the house keeps sealed. Let them fast-track the signing and lay out the papers in the back room. Let the sealed golden flaken envelope go up on the stage with North Six's name inside it, because they had never once imagined the sealed name and the sample tester were the same woman. And so they had built, all by themselves, the exact room in which I would stop being no one. Every guest they invited was a witness I didn't have to summon. Every camera they arranged was mine now. They were assembling my stage and calling it their triumph. I would reveal myself where they had gathered the whole industry to honor a mystery, and let them find out, live, in front of everyone whose respect they'd spent, who had been standing at the edge of the room the entire time. I pushed the door with my shoulder and went in with the tray, eyes down, and none of them stopped talking. The point is, the room reads as failure, Arthur was saying, expansive, a man who has already spent the commission. Batch spoiled, tech disgraced, the lab clearly can't hold standard. Victor's people wanted a clean narrative, and now they've got one. We closed during the toast. And the flagship? That was Clara, sharp. If the pour is garbage, the critics will. The critics will have 3 glasses of the real champagne before the pour, Giselle said, in the low, golden voice she used for interviews, the voice the world believed had built these perfumes. She was radiant in the low light, the heiress who could not smell her way out of a garden. And she lifted her empty glass toward me without looking at me, the way you lift a hand for the sun. Fill this. Honestly, Clara, no one at these things smells anything. They smell the name. A perfume is nothing until it has the right name on the bottle. That has always been the whole business. I filled her glass. I filled Arthur's. I moved around the table pouring, level, exact, a machine that happens to breathe. And Victor Finch at the head of the table said, "And the one to the left," without turning his head, meaning his own glass, meaning me, and I filled that too. His father's playbook and his father's blindness, both inherited whole. Giselle raised the glass she had not thanked me for. "To the gala," she said, "and to finally clearing out the dead weight in the lab. 10 years of that room thinking it's the soul of this house. God. To the sale, and to whoever we get to never pour for us again." They drank. I stood against the wall with the bottle in my hand, unseen, refilling the glasses of the people toasting my erasure. And I graded them one last time, note by note, and every grade came back the same. And it was not anger I felt. It was the still, wide calm of a composition finally finished. Every note placed, the dry down set, the whole thing waiting only for a nose to lift it and name it aloud. You find out what a perfume truly is at 4 in the morning, alone at the organ, when the label is off and only the accord is left. I had been finding it out about these people for 10 years. Now I had let them build me a stage, gather my witnesses, print my invitations, and pour themselves a toast to the very thing they were about to lose. And they had no idea, none of them, that the last decision of the whole long night had already been made, in the dark, by the woman holding the bottle. They scheduled the sale for the night of the gala. They had no idea the nose they were about to honor had been washing their blotters for 10 years. Chapter 7. The 20th Note. The ballroom smelled of money pretending to be art. I stood at the edge of it in a borrowed catering vest, a tray of half-empty glasses against my hip, and read the room the only way I have ever known how to read anything, by its accord. Beneath the over-ordered lilies, beneath the wax of 400 candles and the sugar burn of the dessert station, beneath the colognes of 200 men who all believed they smelled expensive, there was a top note of ambition gone slightly rancid. The House of Rêverie was throwing the most beautiful party of the decade to disguise the fact that it was being sold out from under the people who built it. I had composed the perfume that would win the night. I was there to collect the empty glasses. 4 in the morning is when you find out what a house truly is. But so, it turns out, is 9 o'clock at a gala, when the label is finally peeled off in front of everyone and only the accord is left. They had built a stage at the far end of the room. On a pedestal at its center, under a single cool spotlight, stood the flagship, the perfume of the year, the crystal flaken I had spent 8 months building at hours no one else kept. faceted, heavy as a held breath, empty of a name, because the whole theater of the evening was that the name was a secret to be unveiled. I knew what was inside the glass better than I knew my own face, because I had stopped looking at my own face years ago and had never once stopped smelling. I moved along the wall, invisible, and let the evening arrange itself for me. The raiders had a table near the front. Victor Finch sat at the center of it the way a stone sits at the center of a ring, smooth, certain, wearing a suit the color of wet slate. His people did not look at the perfume on the pedestal. They looked at the room the way a man looks at a house he intends to knock down, measuring the load-bearing walls, deciding what to gut. I had held that man's coat once, in the lobby, and he had handed it to me without a glance, the way you'd hand your coat to a rack. I had read 3 years of his cologne off the collar. Vetiver, cheap ambroxan, the sweat of a man who thinks he cannot be surprised. Fail. Near the stage, the press. The invited kind, the fragrance journalists and the critics, the ones who decide what genius means for the season. And the elite, the buyers, the front row of people who lifted crystal and worshipped the name etched on the glass and never once in their lives had thought about the hands. And in the back, by the swinging kitchen doors, in the worst light in the room, the crew. My crew. Julian Croft in a jacket that did not fit, standing the way he stood at the bench, patient and tired and unbowed. Elodie beside him, who now knew exactly who I was, and had spent 2 days pretending she didn't, which is the hardest thing I have ever asked of anyone. And Sofia Navarro, fired 11 days ago on a scandal she never committed, here anyway, because she loved the house more than the house had ever loved her. She kept touching a folder under her arm like a talisman. They had put the people who made the perfume against the wall by the trash. I capped that observation, exactly level, and set it in the ledger with the rest. Giselle Beaumont moved through the front of the room like weather. Silver gown, hair the color of aged brass, a smile she could turn on a buyer at 40 feet. She was, I will grant her, extraordinary at the one thing she had ever truly been able to do, which was to make people believe that beauty had come out of her instead of merely landing on her. She stopped at Victor Finch's table and laughed, and the laugh reached me across the whole room, bright and practiced, and I thought, she is going to announce the sale tonight, right here, and call it a gift. A bell chimed. The lights banked down. The host took the stage, a genial man rented for the occasion, all teeth and cufflinks, and the room turned toward the pedestal like a field turning toward a false sun. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "the House of Rêverie." And then the critic. They had wheeled out the most respected nose in the trade press to do the honors, a lean silver man who had once written a paragraph about one of my accords that I had cut out and kept, though he had credited it to Giselle. He lifted a blotter he had dipped earlier, closed his eyes, and the room went reverent. "I have been smelling perfume for 30 years, he said. I did not expect at this point in my life to be frightened by a bottle. A ripple of delighted laughter. This composition is not a fragrance. It is an argument. It opens like cold light and closes like a held secret, and somewhere in the middle it does something I cannot name, and I have named everything." He opened his eyes. "The genius behind it is, famously, a mystery. The house keeps its true nose sealed, registered, honored, and hidden. A ghost in the dry down." He turned toward Giselle with a small bow. "The most celebrated anonymous perfumer of our age. Tonight, we finally learn the name." Giselle rose. She did not hurry. She let them see her rise. She crossed to the stage and took her place beside the pedestal, one hand resting on the crystal as though the bottle were a child she had raised, chin at the exact angle of a woman receiving something she has decided she deserves. The applause built. Cameras lifted. "Thank you," she said, and the room hushed for her the way it had never once hushed for me. "A perfume," she said, "is nothing until it has the right name on the bottle." I set my tray down on an empty chair. "And tonight," she went on, "the House of Rêverie begins a new chapter, a larger one. I've made a decision, with our partners at Meridian, with love and with vision, to open this house to the world in a way it has never been opened. Tonight is not only a launch, tonight is a beginning." Backstage, I knew, at that exact moment, the papers were on the table. Arthur Sterling had told a buyer 3 nights ago, in a voice he thought only the walls could hear, that the signing would run during the applause. No one reads a contract while a woman in silver is being adored. The lab crew's badges were already deactivated for midnight. The naturals contracts, the growers, the fields, the people who put the soul into the bottle were drafted for termination on Monday. Everything Giselle called a beginning was, for everyone standing by the trash at the back of the room, an ending scheduled to the minute. The host stepped forward with a small gold envelope. "Before the announcement our host has planned," he said, warm, oblivious, "the industry has an announcement of its own. This year's golden flagon, the highest honor our craft can give, goes not to a house, but to a nose. And this year's laureate is the sealed one, the one you've all been guessing about for a decade." He slit the envelope with his thumb. "The golden flagon goes to the nose registered with the guild only as North 6. A murmur, delighted, electric. "So I'll ask the question the whole industry has waited 10 years to hear answered." He looked out at the tables, at the press, at the buyers, at everyone but the woman in the catering vest by the wall. "Will North 6 come forward?" Silence. The expectant silence of a room waiting for a limousine door, for a curtain, for someone important to descend from somewhere important. Giselle's smile had gone very slightly fixed. She had not been told this was on the program tonight. She glanced once toward Arthur at the side of the stage. "Improvise," the glance said. "Cover it." I picked up the flagon and crossed the floor. It is a strange thing to walk across a room that has spent 10 years deciding you are furniture. I felt them notice me the way you notice a draft, a woman in the wrong clothes moving in the wrong direction, toward the light instead of away from it. Somebody's hand half lifted to stop me. I was already up the steps and onto the stage, the crystal heavy and cold and mine in my palm, and I took the microphone out of the host's surprised hand as gently as taking a blotter from a student. "North 6 sent no representative," I said. My voice came out of the speakers all around the room, low and even, and I watched 200 faces try to place it and fail. "North 6 is standing on the stage," I said, holding the bottle. I let them look at me. The lab coat woman, the sample tester, the help. "My name is Eliza Vale. I composed every fragrance this house has sold for 10 years. I turned the flacon slowly in the light. And I have been grading all of you." You could have heard a blotter fall. Giselle made a sound, half a laugh, the reflex of a woman who has always been able to make an inconvenience disappear by refusing to take it seriously. "This is the lab technician," she said too brightly. "I'm so sorry, security." "Don't," I said, not loudly, and something in it stopped her hand in the air. "You'll want to hear this. All of you will. Because the critic said there's a note in this perfume he cannot name, and I am the only living person who can, and I am going to prove it to you the only way that cannot be faked." I lifted the flacon. "I'll name it blind, every note, top, heart, base, the whole architecture, from a bottle I have not smelled tonight and do not need to, because I built it." I did not unstop it. That was the point. Top, cold bergamot, the kind picked before the sun warms the rind. Pink pepper, a thread of frozen mandarin, a green note most of you are calling galbanum. It isn't. It's a violet leaf cut with a whisper of crushed fig stem, and the confusion is intentional. That's 4. The critic had gone very still. Heart, iris, orris butter, aged 6 years, the single most expensive thing in this room including the jewelry. Turkish rose absolute, a hum of orange blossom. Beneath it, a wet stone accord I built from scratch, the smell of rain on a quarry, ozone and mineral, and something almost cold enough to be metal. A breath of immortelle for the burnt sugar shadow. Ambrette seed for the warmth that reads like skin. That's the heart. 11. I could feel the room tilting toward me, the way a field turns. Base, sandalwood, the real thing, not the reconstruction. Vetiver washed until it stops being dirt and starts being silk. Ambergris, legally sourced. Julian can show you the papers. Labdanum, aged patchouli, the fraction most people throw away. Tonka, restrained. A leather note I built without a single animal in it. 19 notes. I lowered the bottle. The critic counted 19. He is the best nose in this room, and he felt a 20th and could not find it, because you cannot find it unless you built it. I looked at Giselle. There is a 20th note in every perfume this house has ever sold under the name of a genius it kept sealed. A bass accord under the bass, in the last hour of the dry down, when the perfume is nearly gone and only the truest thing is left. It smells like the inside of my grandmother's hands after a day in the flower fields. It is the note the label always forgets and the scent always remembers. It is my signature, registered, sealed, and time-stamped with the Perfumers Guild under the name North 6, on every formula in this house's archive going back 10 years. I let the pause open. I can prove authorship of every scent you ever bought from Reverie. I already have. The seals are with the Guild registrar at Table 9, who opened them this afternoon. A woman at Table 9, trim, official, a folder open before her, inclined her head to the room. Clara Mendez, 3 tables over, put her hand over her mouth, and I saw the exact instant the woman who had called me the sample situation understood which side of the ledger she wanted to be on. She drew a folded paper from her clutch and held it up and said nothing, her whole redemption in one motion. The copy of the forgery she had kept in her own files because some part of her had always known she'd need it. Now, I said, grades. I turned to the wing of the stage where Arthur Sterling stood the color of a dropped blotter. Arthur Sterling, business director. 11 days ago, you and Clara manufactured a sabotage scandal against a 26-year-old apprentice named Sofia Navarro, planted a spoiled batch, forged a formula leak log, and fired her before this gala so the one person who would rally this crew would be gone before the sale closed. I reassembled the batch records you shredded. I have the security footage of the plant. It's with the Guild registrar and, as of 6 minutes ago, with the 2 people who just came in the side door. 2 quiet figures had, in fact, come in the side door. You also took a private facilitation fee to push the Meridian sale through, wired through a consultancy that exists only on paper, which is a poor place to hide from a woman who reads paper for a living. Fraud, and a breach of every duty you owe this house. Fail. Arthur started to speak. One of the quiet figures reached him first. I turned to the center table. Victor Finch, managing partner, Meridian Luxury Group. Your plan for the House of Rêverie was in a deck I read 3 weeks ago at 2 in the morning. Gut the lab, fire the perfumers, terminate the naturals contracts, the growers, the fields, the hands. Reformulate the archive into mass market spray at a 40th of the cost, and license this name onto anything with a lid. You were going to buy a soul and sell the jar. He held my eyes. He was the only one in the room not visibly afraid, which is the most dangerous kind of man and the most satisfying to disappoint. You should know I've read this playbook before. Take the maker's formula cheap, erase the maker, keep the name. 12 years ago, a fund ran exactly that play on a young perfumer at a struggling house, took her accord, put another woman's name on it, and had her blacklisted as a lab tech who overreached, so no one in the trade would ever believe her again. I saw the flicker in him then, the first one. That fund was Alistair Finch's, I said. Your father. And that young perfumer was me. You didn't come here to buy this house, Mr. Finch. You came to finish a job your father started. I've waited 12 years for a Finch to walk back into the room where it happened. Fail, but I'll give your father credit for one thing. He taught you to underestimate the woman holding your coat. He did not sit down. But he did not speak either. And in a room like that, those are the same thing. Then I turned, last, to Giselle. She stood beside the empty pedestal, one hand on the marble, the radiance drained out of her, leaving only the architecture of it, the angle of the chin, the poise, held now over nothing. Giselle Beaumont, I said, and I heard my voice go quiet, and quiet carried further in that room than any shout. 12 years ago, you took an accord called Ember. It was mine. You put your name on it, called it a family gift, built this entire house on it, and had the woman who made it thrown out with the empties. And you have spent 12 years standing in front of rooms like this one, closing your eyes, pretending to smell what you were selling. That's a lie, she said, but she said it to me, not to the room, and everyone heard the difference. Then it's an easy thing to disprove. I lifted the flacon one last time and held it out toward her across the stage, an offering, a dare. Name the 20th note, Giselle. The room did not breathe. The one under the base, the one the critic felt and couldn't find. It's in every perfume you ever took credit for. Your whole legend is built on a note you have never once been able to smell. I set the bottle in the pool of gold light where the name was supposed to have been unveiled. You can't. You never could. You're a nosmic. You have been your whole life, and hidden it so well you may not even let yourself know the size of it. That's the cruelest part. You didn't steal the perfume because you loved it. You stole it because you couldn't smell it, and you needed the world to believe you could. She opened her mouth. Nothing came. Her hand went to her throat. For the length of a held breath, she looked, not like a villain, but like a woman standing in a dark she has spent her whole life insisting was light. And behind me, backstage, I heard the specific dry rasp of a pen being set down on a table. Someone had been signing. I put my hand over the microphone and said, to the wing, to the lawyer with the leather folder half open on a side table where the sale was being executed in the dark while the applause was supposed to cover it, "Stop signing. There's nothing to sell." I took my hand off the mic. "Here is the last grade," I said to the room. "And it's mine to give, because it changes what happens to every person in this building on Monday morning. The House of Rêverie has been insolvent for 2 years. It has been kept alive by a single creditor who quietly bought its debt, and, through a holding company called Greywater Atelier, the one asset worth anything, the Formula Archive. Every formula in it registered to North 6. To me. The house does not own its own perfumes. It never did. It owns a name on a bottle. I own what's inside the glass, and I own the note that comes due." I looked at Victor Finch. "You cannot buy a house whose only assets belong to the woman you handed your coat. The Meridian deal is void as of this sentence. There is nothing on that table for you to purchase. Go home." Then I found the back wall. My crew. "Sofia Navarro." She startled, the folder clutched to her chest. "You were fired on a lie 11 days ago. You are reinstated as of this moment, not as an apprentice. As head perfumer of this house, which I am restructuring tonight, and which will pay for itself out of an archive it should have been paying its makers for all along. Pass." My voice caught once, and I let it. "Julian Croft, Elodie Dubois, every grower and lab hand whose badge was set to die at midnight, your contracts stand. The naturals contracts stand. The growers stay. The fields stay. The hands stay." I picked the flacon back up off the pedestal, out of the spotlight meant for a name that was never going to be spoken, and I held it up so the whole room could see the light break through the crystal. "The house stays," I said, "with the hands that make it. Effective now." For 1 full second, nobody moved. 200 people who had spent 10 years looking straight through a woman in a lab coat sat in a silence so complete I could hear the candles. Then, at the back by the swinging doors, in the worst light in the room, Sofia Navarro got to her feet. Julian rose beside her. Then Elodie. Then a grower I had sourced heiress from for 9 years, a man whose hands I had known long before I knew his face. Then the guild registrar at table 9. Then the critic, the best nose in the room, who had counted 19 and believed me about the 20th, he stood and began, softly, to clap. It moved through the room like the dry down of a great perfume, from the base up, slow and then inevitable, until the elite and the buyers and the press were on their feet too, some because they understood and some only because everyone else had, and I did not care which was which. Giselle Beaumont sat down in the empty gold light. Victor Finch was already gathering his people. Arthur Sterling was already through the side door with someone's hand on his elbow. I stood at the center of the stage where she was supposed to have stood, holding the bottle I had built at 4 in the morning, and I looked out at all of them, the raiders and the press and the elite, and in the back, rising, the only faces in that room I had ever loved. I had spent 10 years learning their faces. Now, for the first time, they learned mine. Chapter 8. What the Scent Remembers. The morning after the gala smelled like cold ash and orange blossom, the way a room smells when the candles have burned out over a bowl of neroli left uncapped all night. I came in through the loading door at 6:10, past the crates of raw naturals, and for the first time in 10 years, no one glanced up to make sure I wasn't touching anything I shouldn't. There was nothing left in this house I couldn't touch. There never had been. Now everyone knew it. I let myself into the lab. The organ stood where it always stood, 300 bottles racked in their long amber rows, the blotters fanned in the tin like cards left mid-game. Someone had taped a sheet of paper to the bench overnight. Block letters. Apprentice neat. Thank you. No signature. I needed none. I knew the hand the way I knew a dry down. Sophia, the last to leave and the first to come back. I capped the neroli, exactly level, and began. Justice, I had learned across a decade of grading people in the dark, is not a hammer. It is a formula. You measure, you weigh, you add nothing for the pleasure of the poor. A composition made of spite reeks of the perfumer, not the flower. I did not want to hurt anyone. I wanted the ledger balanced to the milligram and then to go back to work. So I balanced it. Arthur Sterling went first because Arthur Sterling had left the neatest trail. The kickback he had taken to push the Meridian sale through, the quiet second account, the consulting fee routed through a shell that shared a registered address with a Meridian holding company, had all been sitting in the batch of documents I'd handed the fraud examiners the night before, time-stamped, cross-referenced, dull as a laundry list, and twice as damning. Financial crime is a scent you cannot mask. He had layered it under revival plans and the language of stewardship, but the base note was always the same, and I had spent 10 years learning to read a base note through everything piled on top of it. They took him in on a Tuesday, quietly, no cameras, because the fraud unit prefers paper to spectacle. The charges were fraud and the receipt of an undisclosed payment to breach his fiduciary duty. He had spent years being charming to the people who could buy the house and contemptuous of the people who made it worth buying. And in the end, it was the buyer's money that convicted him. Fail. I had graded him that a long time ago. The world simply caught up to my ledger. Clara Mendez. I had expected to fight. Status-obsessed people usually do. They mistake the title for the self, and when you take the title, they behave as if you've taken the oxygen. She surprised me. She came to the lab 3 days after the gala, not to the front office, to the lab, which told me something. And she stood in the doorway in a coat too expensive for a woman about to be unemployed. And she did not call me the sample situation. She called me Ms. Vale. Then she set a slim folder on the bench between us. I kept copies of the Sophia thing, the batch tampering memo Arthur had me draft. The dates don't match the security logs, and I knew it when I wrote it. She slid it toward me. Her hand was not quite steady. I told myself it wasn't my decision. I told myself a lot of things. I opened the folder. Exactly what she said. The forged sabotage that would have ended Sophia's career before it began. Dated, sloppily, a day before the batch they claimed she'd spoiled even existed. I already had all of it. But there is a difference between evidence you seize and evidence a person surrenders. And the difference matters. Not in a courtroom, where a copy is a copy, but in the only ledger I actually keep. She had flinched first, the night the truth landed. She was flinching now, in the right direction. You'll lose the brand role, I said. That's decided. The house doesn't need enforcers anymore. It needs people who make things. I know, she almost smiled. I don't make anything. Never did. You made this, I said, and closed the folder over her copies. The first honest thing you've handed anyone in this building. Keep making those. It was not absolution. That was Sophia's to give, and Sophia is more generous than I am. But I let Clara walk out of the lab instead of out of the industry, stripped of the role, not of the future. Some people you grade fail and close the book. Some you grade fail and leave the book open, in case they learn to smell what they've been faking. That was the most mercy I had in me, and I did not regret it. Victor Finch took longer because Victor Finch had built his whole life to be untouchable, and I had to let him touch the wall himself. He came to me. Of course he did. Men like Victor Finch do not wait to be summoned. They arrive, and by arriving, they turn the room into their office. He walked into the atelier a week after the gala in a coat I recognized, the same coat he had handed me to hold at a launch 4 months earlier, without looking at my face, because a lab tech's hands are a coat rack that happens to breathe. He looked at my face now. He had learned it, like everyone else. You've made an expensive point, he said. He did not sit. Meridian's offer stands, reduced, given the grand publicity, but it stands. You've proven you're the asset. Assets get bought. Name your number. I let him finish. Then I set down the blotter and told him the number was 0, because there was nothing left of Reverie to buy. I explained it the way I would explain an accord to an apprentice, slowly, note by note. Meridian's whole leverage over the house had been the debt. The house was drowning, and Victor's fund had positioned itself as the only rescue, the way a fund does. Not a buyer, a lifeboat with a bill. But the debt did not belong to a bank he could outweight or a syndicate he could outlawyer. It belonged to Greywater Atelier. Greywater Atelier belonged to me. I had spent 10 patient years acquiring the note the house owed at a discount through intermediaries who thought they were buying a distressed position off a foolish holding company and never asked who held it. I was the creditor. I had always been the creditor, which meant the moment I called the debt, and I had called it backstage on the night of the gala while he was still smiling for the press, the house could not be sold to Meridian, because a house cannot be sold out from under the person who owns the mortgage on its soul. You can't buy it, I said. It isn't for sale. And your fund has already accrued the loss, because your fund has spent months and fees and a very public campaign acquiring a target it can never close. Your investors will notice. They always notice the smell of money that isn't coming back. He was very still. There is the stillness of a man thinking, and the stillness of a man realizing the floor is not where he left it. Your father, I said, ran a fund that did this once before, 12 years ago. Take the maker's formula cheap, erase the maker, own the name. It worked so well, he taught it to you like a family recipe. Alistair Finch's playbook. I picked the blotter back up because this was only a conversation. The maker he erased that time learned the recipe too, from the inside. I've had 12 years to reverse engineer it. You ran your father's play against the one person alive who knows every step of it, because you looked at a lab coat and decided there was no one inside. You planned this. He said it like an accusation. It landed like a compliment. I graded it, I said. There's a difference. Fail, Mr. Finch. Take your coat. His fund ate the loss. The generational circle, the one Alistair Finch opened 12 years ago when he bankrolled the taking of a young perfumer's accord, closed on his son in a conference room I will never see. I did not want him ruined in the streets. I wanted him to have to explain, to the people whose money he'd promised to grow, why he had chased a house he could never own into a wall he never saw, because the wall had been standing in the lab holding his coat the entire time. Some sentences you serve in prison. Some you serve at a partners' meeting, out loud, in front of everyone who mistook you for invincible. He got the second kind. It suited the crime. Giselle Beaumont was the hardest, because in the eyes of the law, she had not done very much. That is the ugly truth about the theft of credit. It is not larceny of a thing, it is larceny of a self, and the statutes are clumsy with selves. She had taken my Ember Accord 12 years ago, put her name where mine had been, given the interviews, accepted the honors, built a legend on a gift she did not possess and could not use, and most of that, legally, is called branding. You cannot jail a woman for wearing a name. I never wanted her in a cell. A cell is a place you can leave. I wanted her to keep everything she could not stand losing, precisely long enough to lose it, and I wanted her present for every degree. So I let the industry sentence her, because the industry, once it can smell the truth, is not merciful to a nose that cannot smell. The trade press ran the guild's sealed registration under North 6 against the house's entire back catalog. Every fragrance Giselle had ever taken a bow for matched to my hidden 20th note like a fingerprint lifted off glass. There was no arguing with a dry down. Critics who had spent a decade calling her a genius of the nose now had to explain in print how a genius of the nose had never once detected the signature note buried in her own house's signature scent. The honors were rescinded, quietly, the way honors always are, a letter, not a headline. The name came off the perfumes. Mine went on, not on the crystal, but on the record, in the one place that outlasts a flacon, the truth of who composed the accord. And then there was the day she had to say it aloud. The guild convened a hearing, a small room, a long table, the smell of old paper and photocopier warmth, no cameras, which was its own kind of verdict. A woman who had lived for cameras judged in a room that had banned them. They asked her, formally, to state her authorship of the compositions. And Giselle Beaumont, who had said a perfume is nothing until it has the right name on the bottle to every critic who would hold a microphone, sat very straight in a beautiful jacket and said, into the paper-smelling quiet, that she had never composed a note, not one. That she had never, in truth, been able to smell one, not the 20th note, not any of them. that she had faked a gift her whole life and called it a family inheritance. She said it because there was no version of the record left in which she could avoid it, and she knew, being clever, that a graceful confession costs less than a fought and lost denial. I was there. She had not expected me to be there. When she finished, she looked down the table and found my face, the face she had looked straight through in the lab for a decade. And I did not gloat, because gloating is a spite note, and I had promised myself the formula would stay clean. "You could have hired me," I said. It was the only thing I said to her, the whole hearing. 12 years ago. You could have put both our names on the bottle. I'd have made you the best house in the world and let you be the face of it, and you'd have deserved the applause, because a face is real work too. You didn't need to erase me. You chose it because erasing me was cheaper than sharing. I stood, because I had a batch resting, and I did not intend to be late for it. That's the part no sentence covers, not the taking, the choosing. She had no name to put on that. For the first time in 12 years, Giselle Beaumont was in a room where the label was off, and only the accord was left, and there was nothing of hers in it. She found out what she truly was at a long table in the middle of the afternoon. I did not need to grade her aloud. She was doing it herself, and would, I suspected, for a long time. Then I went back to the lab, because the comeuppance is only the note that clears the air. The coda is what you build in the clean air after. We renamed the house. Not to my name alone, that would have been another kind of erasing. One name swapped for another over the same forgotten hands. We called it Maison Vale, the Elena Atelier. Vale for me, yes. I had earned the letters, and there is no false modesty in a signature honestly composed. But Elena for my grandmother, Elena Santos, who picked flowers in a distillation town before dawn her whole life and taught me to name a field blind, who told me a scent remembers the hands that gathered it, even when the label forgets. The house's whole fortune had been built, first note to last, on the labor of people whose names never touched a bottle. If the atelier was going to carry a name, it would carry the name of the woman with soil under her nails, who taught the woman who composed the accords. There is a wall in the atelier where the house had always hung portraits of the Rêverie line. Glossy, lit, framed in gilt, generations of faces that had never smelled a thing. I took them down. I did not throw them away. I am not in the business of erasing people, even people who erased me. I boxed them and sent them to Giselle, because they were her family, and grief for a lineage is still grief. In the largest frame in the center of the wall, I hung a photograph I had carried for 40 years. A small, weathered woman in a headscarf, standing in a field of blossoms at first light, a gathering basket on her hip, squinting into a sun that had not yet crested the hills. Under it, on a small brass plate, one word: gatherer. Not founder, not nose, not artist, though she was all three before the industry had words for it. The first and truest job in perfumery, the one everything else is built on, the one the label always forgets. I hung it at eye level so that everyone who walked into the atelier would meet her eyes before they met mine. Sophia Navarro. I made head perfumer. I could have kept the title. It was mine by every right. But I had spent 10 years learning what happens to a gift that stays hidden too long, and I was not going to build a house that needed another secret nose. Sophia had the gift, the real one, the one you cannot fake, the one Giselle had spent a career pantomiming. And she had something I'd lost somewhere in the long, cold decade of grading people in the dark. She still believed perfumery could be honest. So I gave her the bench, the title, the name on the record, the whole terrifying visibility of being the maker who is allowed to be seen. And I stood behind her, where a mentor stands, close enough to catch a batch, far enough that the light landed on her. "I'm not ready," she told me the day I told her. "No one is," I said. "You're honest, you're gifted, and you know what it costs to be invisible because you almost were. That's the whole job. The readiness comes after." Then I gave her the only rule that mattered. "You'll have hidden noses working under you someday, Sophia. The ones nobody photographs. Your one rule is the one this house forgot for 100 years. The name of the hand goes on the record. Every time. Even when it's cheaper to erase them. Especially then." She has that rule now. She teaches it to the interns. The chain that was supposed to erase her runs the other way through her, the next hidden nose, made visible, teaching the next to stay visible. That is the only legacy I trust. Not a name on crystal, but a rule in a room, passed hand to hand like a blotter. The crew kept their livelihoods, all of them. The naturals sourcing stayed. The growers who'd been about to have their contracts torn up and replaced with a synthetic that smells like the memory of a flower described by someone who'd only read about flowers. I signed the contracts long, because a house that forgets its gatherers is a house I have already watched die once. Elodie Dubois runs the lab now, my oldest friend, the one who knew me from a single blotter and a scar on my hand and an old trade press photo captioned E. Vance, Perfumer. I gave her the lab, a title with real weight on it, and the respect the house had never spent on the people who kept it running, and she said, dry as ever. Took you 10 years to notice I was doing your job. She was right. She usually is. And Julian Croft. He found me at the organ at 4 in the morning, because Julian Croft has known for 40 years that the truth of a house lives at the bench before dawn, when the label is off and only the accord is left. I was building something small and entirely my own. One formula, by hand. No assignment, no name for the market, just the pleasure of the accord. He watched me work for a while from the doorway. He'd carried a guilt for 12 years, he'd told me once, back when he thought I was a stranger who reminded him of someone. A young perfumer whose formula he'd watched get taken, and he'd said nothing to keep his post. I know who you are now, he said finally. I've known since the gala. I keep turning it over. You milled the naturals for the ember, I said, not looking up. 12 years ago. I remember your hands on it. I never forgot that scent. His voice went rough on it. Best thing I ever helped make. I told myself for years I didn't recognize you. Truth is, I didn't let myself. Recognizing you meant admitting I stood there and watched, and said nothing. He came and stood at the organ, at a respectful distance, the way you stand near a working nose. I'm sorry. It's 12 years late and it doesn't buy anything, but I never stopped being able to smell what they threw away. I could have made him carry it longer, but Julian Croft had graded pass in my ledger for years, the one senior figure who called me the nose and meant it. A man who says nothing to keep his post, and a man who spends the next 12 years unable to forget the scent he betrayed are not the same man. The second had come to the bench at 4 in the morning to say so. Hand me the ambrette, I said, the one from the new growers. Let's see if your sourcing is as good as your memory. It was. It always had been. We worked until the bergamot light came up cold over the crates, two people who had both loved the same accord long before either of them could say so, and there was nothing saccharine in it and nothing owed. Just the work and the scent, and 40 years of hands finally on the same bench in the light. That was the whole of the romance, and it was enough. I keep one formula for myself now, just one. I compose it by hand at the organ at 4 in the morning when the house is dark and Sophia's name is on the crystal and Elena is watching the room from the center of the wall with a basket on her hip. No one will ever smell this one but me. It has a hidden 20th note that no one else can build or detect. My fingerprint in the dry down for no audience, sealed under a name only the guild and I will ever read. I put it there for the same reason my grandmother named a field to a child who couldn't yet read a label. Because a thing you make in the dark, for no applause, is the truest measure of what you actually are. Giselle said it, all those years, to every critic who would listen. She was right, in a way she never understood. A perfume is nothing until it has the right name on the bottle. So I put the right name back, not on the crystal, where the buyers look and the light vents, but in the dry down, in the 20th note, in the base where the hands are, where no spotlight has ever reached and no thief ever thought to steal. You find out what a perfume truly is at 4 in the morning, alone at the organ, when the label is off and only the accord is left. So am I. Pass.